Before my parents split up, we used to live in a mini mansion near a man-made lake. It had a massive garden and was surrounded by land with some water and lots of wild ducks. When my brother was still a toddler, before I was born, he fell into one of these lakes and nearly drowned. If it weren't for my uncle who saw him, he would have died for sure. When he got pulled out of the water, he was talking about some naked fish lady or something that was there staring at him. Everyone being shocked about what had just happened, they didn't bat an eyelid about this lady and just made sure that he was okay. Well, a few years later, when I was like 3 and my sister was around 11, she would occasionally complain to my parents about this lady who would visit her sometimes at night. She was always wet, naked, and something to do with being aquatic. She also mentioned that sometimes the husband showed up too, but was not very nice and she didn't really like him. When this woman wasn't visiting, she would be somewhere singing though. Every single night, my sister would talk about hearing singing, and the neighbors' kids would also mention it too. The parents thought that the kids were just trying to scare them, so they didn't really care, but it's this next part that really freaks me out. So fast forward to when I'm like about 12, we get into contact with the people who now own that house as we moved out a long time ago, and we never had mentioned this mermaid lady to them. But as we're leaving and saying our goodbyes, they start talking about this lady who sings and visits them at nighttime, who's always wet and sort of appears like a fish. We have never been able to figure this out, as there is just no way that they could have known about how we used to see things like that. It's the same house, just 10 to 15 years later, but that is startling to say the least. So, does anyone have any ideas as to what this could actually be? This happened when I was 7 years old. I know that memory can be tricky, but I have also thought about this experience pretty much every day since it happened. It's less important to me if this experience was real or not, and more important to me that whatever it was, it had a significant, long-lasting impact on my life. And the crazy thing is, it only lasted for a few seconds. So, it was the night before or early morning of January 25th, 1999. It was in Central California, and I only know the exact date because it was the only time it snowed here, in a really long time anyway. So you can still Google the newspaper articles about it. Anyway, basically what happened was, I woke up, sat up straight in bed, and crouching on the bed, one knee bent on the bed and one leg off the bed, was a typical grey alien. Large head, big black eyes. To me, the skin looked greenish-grey and had an almost rubbery or just very smooth texture. No nose, slit for a mouth, no visible ears, and I remember it not wearing any clothing, it seemed. It just stared at me, and I just remember feeling sort of shocked, like not enough time to even feel terrified. That came the days, weeks, or months after. For whatever reason, I just sort of laid back down, turned on my side, put the covers over my head, and I guess I must have fallen asleep. Now, the whole next day, I was thankfully partially distracted by a rare snow day, but I also was very aware that I would not be able to go to sleep without feeling petrified for a very long time. I thought about telling my parents, but I just didn't have a word for, well, what I had seen. No reference for it. I didn't know what an alien or a grey was. For a lack of a better word, it was totally alien and just unknown to me. It wasn't until I was at my friend's house, whose dad was watching a sci-fi movie that had typical greys in it, that I learned to associate what I had seen with the word alien, and that they were at least real enough to be depicted on TV. And then, of course, that's when I started noticing them everywhere, in shows, movies, art, etc. I accept that this could have been a hallucination or a very vivid nightmare or whatever. Maybe I had seen them depicted on a TV before and my subconscious just picked up on it or something, but it is the single event that led to a lifelong obsession with aliens sounds and unexplained phenomena. Sometimes I wonder if that was the whole point of that experience in the first place, or if that's a part of the reason why they appear to people, just so stories about them will continue to influence our culture, our mythos, and our spirituality. Whatever the case may be, I appreciate you guys hearing me out, and thanks for listening. So I had an unexplainable incident happen to me while hunting several years back. I was new to the area and drew my first antelope tag in an area known as the Red Desert, and I specifically scouted a remote location known as Bison Basin to hunt in. This area is probably one of the most remote areas in the lower 48, and also a great area for antelope hunting. But all that is really out there is some oil and gas production and uranium mining ops too. Long story short, I shot an antelope about 150 yards away from me and 200 yards from my truck. I walked out to where it dropped and filled out and attached my tag, and that's when I looked up and noticed off in the distance on the horizon a bright light moving quickly. It was hard to gauge the speed because it was probably a good 10 miles off in the distance. You can see for miles in all directions out here. One thing to note though is that time and distance intervals are important to this story. With antelope meat, it is important to get the animal cooled off as quickly as possible, or else the meat can taste kind of, well, funky, I guess you could say. So I was in a rush to get the animal dressed and back to my truck so that I could pack the body cavity with ice. That being said, I tagged the buck, looked up, and saw the light on the horizon, thinking nothing of it, and I quickly went to work field dressing. In a matter of 30 to 45 seconds, I would say, I had opened up the body cavity and removed the guts, and that's when I glanced up and noticed about maybe a mile away, or perhaps even less, that the light that I had seen in the distance was approaching me with incredible speed. So in that 30 to 45 seconds, that light must have covered a distance of what I estimate to have been 9 miles, and it was approaching me at this speed too. I couldn't tell what I was looking at as the light was very bright and flying over the top of the sagebrush and making no sound. As the light got to within about 200 yards of me, I would say, after observing it for a few seconds, I could make out what it was. It was a rectangular shape of polished metal, about 5 feet tall by 2 to 3 feet wide, like a dressing mirror, and it was reflecting the setting sun, which was behind me, back at me. The flying object then dropped down below the sage, and I just couldn't see it anymore. Again, it made no sound, but it was close enough to me that I should have heard engine noise at least. Obviously, I was spooked and I was pretty shook. I wanted to get back to my truck and leave, but I had to take the animal, so I bent over and hid below the sagebrush line, and quickly finished field dressing and grabbed the leg, and I just took off running, dragging the antelope back towards my truck. This all took a matter of 1 to 1.5 minutes before I was completely gassed, so I stopped, looked back to see if the light was anywhere to be seen, and I could now see the light blasting off in the opposite direction. Again, back 8 to 9 miles, going towards the horizon, moving faster than anything could possibly travel over that terrain. It was still reflecting the setting sun back at me, and it eventually disappeared over the horizon after a couple of seconds, and I finished dragging the animal to the truck, and I just got the heck out of there. I don't know what I saw, but I know that it was not a drone, SXS, or any kind of low-flying plane. I definitely would have heard the engine noise being that close, and that terrain could not be covered at that speed by any kind of wheeled vehicle, that much is clear. I even went as far to ask Fish and Game and the uranium miners if they ever operated any kind of drones that could perform like that, and they said no, but I am 100% sure that that was no drone. I haven't been back to the area since, and I don't have any plans to do so. So my house is well known for being haunted, and there has been deaths, murders, etc. in my house. But tonight was definitely the straw that broke the camel's back. You see, my wife is frequently home alone because I work in the next town over, and my mother-in-law does home health. Tonight, she was just scrolling on Facebook when her phone started to go crazy, randomly opening apps, even after she closed everything out, and she said that a male voice came through her phone and said hello multiple times and echoed, but also sounded like it was right there. This is not the first time anything paranormal has happened in our house, but for this to keep happening when she is home by herself is quite frankly starting to tick me off. I've told whatever it is on multiple occasions that it's not welcome, nor is it allowed to attach to anybody in this house, including our animals, and to leave us all alone and leave our house. We have crystals in the house that give great energy and have really helped the energy of the house and the flow at that. But it just seems like the paranormal activity is starting to ramp up again, and I'm beyond over it, because last night we were watching TV and watched a white object fly past our window when our window is way too tall for any average person, especially in our area of old people. Plus, to fly by the window like that, especially from that angle which comes straight from a wall towards the street, it just makes no sense. I've woken up in the middle of the night and I saw a face hovering next to the TV that swooped down towards me but stopped about 3 feet from me and vanished into thin air. We have heard footsteps, seen a child with razor-sharp teeth in the back room twice. It's always been the same child back there, and for a little bit of history, the mayor of our town at one point was beat to death in the driveway here. A college student OD'd in one of the bedrooms. Multiple family members have passed away in the house from natural causes, and a man and his wife had an argument because he was cheating here. He got drunk, she apparently killed him, and he walked through the house leaving blood that was still in the house when my wife and her family moved in. He apparently bled out and died in the front porch in a folding chair. And while none of the three, between the mayor, the college student, and the man who was stabbed by his wife, have ever been violent or even scary, whatever this thing is that is continuing to mess with my wife, I want it gone and I don't know what to do. Which is why I'm here. Can anyone tell me what this might be, and how to possibly get rid of it and banish it out of our house? I don't want my family to live in fear, and I don't want to have to worry every time that I leave the house too. I'm worried that something crazy is going to happen when I'm not there, and there's going to be nothing that I can do about it. So, any and all help is very much appreciated, and a huge thank you in advance. I work in a care home in the UK and I work nights. I used to work evenings, but it all started with just footsteps behind me, particularly when I was on my own. Then they started scratching my head and tapping it. I then changed to night shifts and certain things started popping up that all night staff have seen. Like one night, maybe about a year ago, I was walking down a staircase and to my right is a corridor that leads to a dead end. I looked down the corridor and I saw a figure. She was almost glowing and she was so white that she had no face and very straggly hair. She was peeping out of a doorway of a bathroom. I could only see her head and upper body. Although she had no face, it felt like she was watching me, so I turned to call out for my coworker, but when I glanced back, she was gone. She doesn't bother me too much. She seems nice, I guess, and I've never worried about seeing her again, and I haven't. Another spirit is what staff call the Shadow Man. He lurks behind and in corners, and he only gets very close to one staff member who I regularly work with. I've only seen him in one of the front entrances, and I froze, and so did he. One night, though, me and this one coworker were doing the cleaning in the corridor with all the living rooms. We were standing there having a rant about general stuff that was annoying us, I guess, but for context, the spirits never like us being negative, it seems. And as we were ranting, all the living rooms started making really loud noises, all at once. I felt brave and told them to shut up. I turned away from the noise, and this one coworker told me the Shadow Man was directly behind me. I didn't look, so I don't know if he was, but the noise quieted down because we'd stopped our discussion, but when we started up again, it started as well. Other sort of things happened too, where we would be hearing a man shout "help me" with no man around as we were in a corridor filled with ladies who were asleep. Another time would be when I was walking out of the kitchen and all of the cutlery started banging around. I run really quickly and refuse to be in that kitchen once it's dark outside. Another is the people we see sat in the chairs in our peripheral vision, but when we look, nobody's ever there. Then there's the whistling that happens so close to us, but we have to pretend not to hear it because it just feels really wrong. Another time is that I sat in the staff room on my own and something said my name in my ear, but I ignored it. Then when I'm in the laundry room, I can hear things in the corridor like walking frames, even when everybody is asleep. Another time, there was screaming upstairs and we couldn't find the source of it anywhere. It was like when we went to one end of the corridor, it screamed on the opposite side, and then we'd be going back and forth without finding the person screaming. On another shift, we sat in the staff room at around 5 a.m. and there was a walking stick sound in the corridor. We went out to see if anybody was there and awake, but they weren't. Another night, me and another co-worker are doing normal resident assistance, and we're both working with one person. I suddenly start hearing banging noises, but my other co-worker couldn't hear it. At first I ignored it, after my co-worker said that she didn't hear anything, and summed it up to an overactive imagination. It then began getting louder though, and I turned to my co-worker and said someone must be breaking in or something. She told me to look out of the front window as there's a view to the main entrance there, but nobody was there. Again, I tried to ignore it. When we left this particular room, we decided to go up to the corridor, and then we passed the bathroom that I previously said that I saw a peeping woman from. The door was closed this night. Suddenly, the door starts banging really loudly and shaking. At that, we both ran back down the corridor as we were both scared. All alarms were on doors, so we knew that no residents were awake. And quite honestly, I still have no idea what is actually in that bathroom. Another night, I was on shift again walking down that same corridor with a staff member. We had done our hourly checks on all residents and suddenly start hearing on a loop, help me," over and over again in a woman's voice. At first we think it's a resident and instantly start checking rooms frantically, but nobody is awake. We can still hear the "help me" though. It was after checking rooms that we listened closely and neither of us actually recognized the voice. We didn't leave each other's side all night that night because it was pretty terrifying. Now, I left the care home temporarily about 3 months ago and I can go back at any point, but genuinely it is a terrifying place. I'm not very good at telling stories and I'm sorry if this is a bit of a ramble of all things weird and creepy, but I've always wondered what is in the home and how aware they are of their surroundings. I don't like that they know my name and they also seem to target night staff. That's a bit creepy and I just really, really hope that nothing ever follows me home. I live in PNW in a fairly populated but still mountain town. I specifically live on 425 feet of riverfront. So last night at around 9:30 p.m, myself and my partner started hearing an initially distant, indistinguishable voice screaming in a state of panic and distress. We live near a popular trailhead and a few times over the years, people have somehow wandered down our road late at night, sometimes a little bit tipsy and sometimes in small groups, sometimes transient. So, when we started to hear an erratic voice, we got up, started initially checking the parameters of our house and the road, but there was absolutely nobody out there. However, over the course of the next couple of minutes, the voice got louder and louder and obviously closer, and it was screaming at the top of its lungs for help. I say help in parentheses because it was a little difficult to make out, but it sounded like a not fully enunciated help. Whatever it was clearly in extra distress, screaming for its life distress, yelling help. We could only make out help like help with a soft P if that makes sense, but the words sounded the exact same every time. There was no variance or other sounds, just the word help, back to back in the most distressed voice that I've ever heard. With how quickly the screams were approaching and a weird echo to them as well, we quickly realized whatever was screaming for help was actually in the river. It was actively being pulled down the river current. Our river is wide, fast-moving and dangerous this time of year. There was no other way for a voice to be approaching so rapidly and from the location that it was, unless it were in the river. We see and hear a lot of kayakers and know how their voices travel down there as well. So, over the course of about 3 minutes, we hear what was a distant cry for help, work up to the point that it's so loud that it sounded a few feet away, then slowly softer until we can no longer hear the screaming. Again, this sounds like a deep middle-aged man's voice, and the screams are maybe about 2 to 3 seconds apart, just back to back. At first, we tried to convince ourselves that it was an animal. We do see a lot of wildlife here after all. A herd of elk practically lives on our property, and we see bears and wildcats too. We initially thought maybe a young elk fell in the river, but no. We googled just about every animal distress call, scream, fight sounds, etc., anything really, and nothing even came close. I've always heard that coyotes can scream like people, but it was definitely not an older man. I've heard bears can yelp deep, however, they have absolutely no definition to their calls, and elk are way more high-pitched, and same for all local wildcats. Even the birds of prey and ravens that can mimic sounds cannot sound like this voice did. Initially, I called the non-emergency line because I wanted to convince myself that it was an animal. However, they quickly patched me over to 911 and said that I was apparently the third call for the same thing. So apparently the voice was strange and concerning enough that my even more wilderness-raised and savvy neighbors, they were concerned, and the police department took it very seriously. Then, the more that I thought and thought about it, I started to think that if I was in a freezing river fighting for my life screaming for help, I might not yell as clearly as possible, due to the pure state of panic, distress, and attempt to stay afloat. The more I thought about it, the more I was sure that it was a person though. 911 sent out 2 police officers. They were extremely nice and they took the call very seriously, but with just 2 of them, all they had were flashlights and a chainsaw, and they kinda just walked down to a few spots at the river and peeked around a bit. When our city has a genuine suspicion of a person in the river or a lost hiker, they send search and rescue and the helicopter, but they didn't do this night. I told my partner that I wouldn't be surprised if the next morning when it's daylight, somebody finds a body at that river spot. But it's getting later in the morning and I've kept my eye on the police scanner and the local media as well, and I just haven't seen anything. Now I'm back to really hoping that it was just a wild animal, but tell me, does anyone know of a wild animal that could sound like that? What are the chances if this was a human man that he pulled himself out somewhere down the line and got some help, or do we think that it's just a matter of time until someone reports him missing, or we find a body down the river? Also, just a minor update is that within the last 15 minutes, a helicopter has begun tracing up and down the river and circling at an area a ways past my house. So I'm feeling a little bit discouraged that it likely was actually a human. That being said, I haven't seen anything on any social media, and usually my local police post updates about stuff like this, if it was a human, very quickly. Also, the locals usually buzz about things like this on social media, and I haven't seen anything posted yet. I'm not sure what's going on at the moment, but this whole situation is, well, pretty creepy to say the least. I live alone with a 7-month-old, non-walking child. Things have been getting, well, progressively weirder too the longer that I stay here. To start, believe me or not, I have a history of seeing ghosts. In my first week here, I saw a little girl peek her head into my doorway in my bedroom. Now, if you don't believe that, I'll give you some more, but things have been randomly disappearing out of my home, like little things, baby toys, earrings, etc. At first I just wrote it off as me misplacing things, easy enough. Then today things spiked big time. A lot of things I'd been missing completely out of nowhere just sort of appeared on the floor of my living room, like right in the middle of the floor. Tonight, I come home from a day out with my boyfriend and I noticed my lights were off. With a weird encounter the night before, or someone knocking on my door last night, I called a friend and had him walk me through the house to be sure, because I leave my lights on all the time. I'm terrified of the dark, so I just leave the lights on at all times. The apartment is clear and the door was locked when I entered though, and after a couple of hours I go to the bathroom and I realize that my phone has been recording audio on a social media app for over 10 minutes while I was staring right at it, even using it in fact. I listen back to the audio and you can hear me texting and using the phone when on Snapchat. You sort of have to press and hold the audio record button to send a voice message. Then when I go to wash my hands, my bathroom sink is covered in black soot. I don't work a dirty job and I have zero idea of where all that black soot came from, as I haven't washed anything like that off of me anytime recently, and I'm kind of obsessive about keeping my sink clean. And I mean, it's all up and down my sink and the backsplash and just everywhere. Then my daughter starts screaming like I've hardly heard her scream that bad. So I go make her a bottle, and when I go into the kitchen, the only burner with something on it was on high heat. My stove has buttons instead of knobs, so this is extremely unlikely to have been an accident. Over the last couple of days, the stove's timer has been randomly going off, and it sounds like an old apartment buzzer, so it's really loud, and it always scares the life out of me too. So, I'm wondering what I can do about this. I'm a terrified single mother, and my apartment doesn't have any smoke alarms, it's very old, and I'm actually pretty scared about what might happen here. Any advice is appreciated as I try to figure out what the heck is going on here. I've recently moved back to my hometown of McLaren Vale in South Australia, after a decade away. I still think back to this particular night too, as I still struggle to comprehend what we saw, as does my childhood mate. So, in November of 2011, I drove to pick up my friend for a sleepover. I had just recently gotten my P-plates and we reveled in the newfound freedom. At approximately 8 p.m, we were driving back toward McLaren Vale of Main South Road, turning left, and just as we started along the road near CPB compound, I stopped dead in the middle of the road. I couldn't believe my eyes, in fact. My friend was typing away on her iPhone and I stuttered, "Mate, what is that?" She didn't look up and I hit her in a panic with my arm, and annoyed, she broke her concentration and looked up to human me. She went pale. Her little voice squeaked, only managing a whisper through her fear. "Dude, what is that?" There, crouched down about 10 feet in front of my hatchback, was a pale, thin thing. "Is that a kangaroo that's been hit?" I tried to reason. No, definitely not. It was tall, at least 6 foot, along being bent up. This thing was hunched over, thin arms and legs, a torso like a human. Its skin pale, near blue-grey, translucent almost. Its bones were completely visible through its paper-thin flesh. We could see every single rib, in fact. Its head was bare except for its black eyes, void black. They didn't reflect any light from the car headlights, too. No nose, just 2 holes, no lips but a wide gaping mouth, and when it opened to hiss or snarl, about 50 to 100 ape-like sharp teeth seemed to point out from its mouth, pointed like daggers. Its hands were sort of human, long, almost black on the ends of its fingers. Human feet, but absolute talons where the toes should have been. Being 2 teenage girls, we were absolutely terrified, frozen still in our tracks. My hands gripped the steering wheel, unsure whether to go forward or back. My friend began to panic. This thing, though, just stared us down, growling, opening and closing its mouth over and over, almost like it was warning us not to do anything stupid. We must have sat there locked eyes with this thing for at least 2 minutes. It then stepped to the left of us. I decided to slowly crawl to the right and move around it. My friend almost jumped into my lap as I tried to calm her down while steering the car around this thing. It bared its teeth as we inched closer. It looked into the car as we came up right beside it, and it looked absolutely rageful, like it hated us. It slowly crawled on all fours like a human would toward the bush, and we watched it as it disappeared just into the darkness, and we didn't see it again. We sped home as fast as we could in my little car, and when we got home, my parents didn't believe us, obviously, despite how terrified we were. They assumed that we must have been smoking or something and just saw something else. But I brought this up with my friend during lockdowns during 2021. I think I had compartmentalized it as a dream to cope or something, but she instantly reiterated word for word what we both saw. I've been trying to find other stories from people regarding sightings. In 2021, I posted on a paranormal forum, but I can't find it anywhere. However, I did get a few people respond, saying one guy had seen something similar in McLaren Vale, the same location as our encounter, and another lady said that she had been stalked in a public toilet, mocked the voice of her mother apparently, by something she believes to have been a skinwalker in Renmark. Obviously, I cannot confirm these things, but if anyone has had any similar encounters or you know something about what it could have been, please do reach out to me because I would genuinely love to know after all these years. This happened just a few nights ago. I waited a few more nights before I decided to post this as well, to see if this was some just reoccurring, explainable thing. It hasn't happened since then though, so I feel it's appropriate to share this now. So my fiancé and I were going to bed at around 10 or 11 p.m. Our bedroom is in the basement and our roommate lives upstairs. His schedule is the opposite of ours pretty much, so we have become accustomed to him sort of knocking on our door later in the night if he needs anything. The fiancé and I were having our final conversation before drifting off, and we hear a familiar knock at the door. "Come in," I say, because we're all pretty close and he knows he's welcome. No one steps through the door though, and I say again, "Come in." Still nothing. So we call his name, and when he doesn't come in the door, I get up and open it. And there was no one there. Huh. I sat and we joked briefly about how it's the ghost. Long story short is that we've had some other weird experiences, as people often do with an old house, but nothing as weird as what happened this night. And so in the end, we just go to bed. Fiancé falls asleep and I start to drift off too. As I'm falling asleep, there's another knock. This doesn't wake fiancé up, so I don't say anything and instead just get up and decide to investigate the basement a little bit. Maybe the cat is just being a brat or something is settling, who knows. I note that the knocking sounded similar in tempo to the first time that it happened, so I wondered if it was some pipes in the walls adjusting to the winter temperatures. I figure, yeah, it must just be that. But I couldn't help the feeling that the noise just was very obviously knocking against our door. What I mean is that we're very used to the sound as our own roommate very often approaches us that way. I also know what creaking pipes sound like and, well, this just was not that. Nor had the pipes ever adjusted that way in previous winters. Well, whatever in the end. It's annoying, but no big deal, right? I go back to bed and actually fall asleep this time. About 30 minutes later, the knocking starts again though. It could be something settling in the house, but it so obviously sounds like knuckles on the wood of our door. The pattern, the tempo, and the hollow sound of our door. And it is happening at our door. It's not the walls or the ceiling. We have our laundry room, a room away from our bedroom, but our door is so thick that we never hear anything happening out there. And because of this, it is decidedly weird, but I'm tired and I have to work in the morning too, so I try my best to ignore it. But every 30 minutes to an hour, the knocking comes back, and with each occurrence, the knock pattern changes, deliberately too. There's fast knocking, slow knocking. There was even a shave and a haircut sort of knock. Each time I'm trying to ignore it and pull back asleep, only to be jostled awake again. I had lost track of time, but I assumed that it was early morning when I was shot awake by a knock followed by a male voice saying, "Hey." Okay, so this had to have been our roommate. I got up and once again opened the door, quickly this time, to find no one. Well, maybe he was messing with us. He does have a weird sense of humor. I begrudgingly put on some clothes to go walk around upstairs and find him. Turns out, he was still at work. The house is pitch black, and at that, I'm starting to freak out. I go to the front door and see if someone was knocking there, and there's no one there either. Of course, if there was someone trying to get in all night, the dog would have been freaking the heck out, but I really had just no other explanation. So I make myself go back to bed. Maybe the pipes are not only shifting to sound like knocking on wood, but also creaking to sound like a man calling out. The night goes on, and though the knocking continues, I finally get used to it and I actually get a few hours sleep. Until around 7 a.m. when my fiance and I leap out of bed to another obvious hey from outside the room. One last time I open the door and we find no one. I confirm that yes, she woke up because of the hay as well, and I explain to her that I've been dealing with the knocking all night. Roommate doesn't come home until later in the day, and I ask him if he tried to talk to us the previous night. He confirms, though, that he never came home and stayed at a friend's house. I tell him what happened, and he's as stumped as we are. Like I said, I waited the following nights to see if there would be any more weird house sounds, and even as things have warmed up and cooled down again, there have been no more weird noises to suggest pipes or other household sounds. In general, we're fans of paranormal activity stuff, but I always err on the side of skepticism. This was probably the weirdest thing to ever happen to us at this house, and I still don't know what it could have been if not some genuine high strangeness. So I was going about my usual hunting trip, turkey shooting. I had a stand set up in a good spot where the turkeys went to rest during the night. I sat posted there for like several hours, I think, only breaking focus to relieve myself or eat. Night comes and I eventually hear noises coming from a small meadow area where the turkeys are usually found. I should probably mention here that I use a bow during night hunting as I find it more peaceful and more productive. Anyway, I made aim and was about to release, but suddenly something in the back of my head told me to put down my bow and stay still. A feeling of just what I can only describe as pure fear and adrenaline hit me, and I really didn't know why. I mean, it was just a turkey, right? Well, hours pass and it's finally 7 a.m., light out. I get down, get to my truck, and peel out of there like my life depended on it. Well, a few days later, a news report comes out on my local paper that a man had been kidnapped, violated, and killed a 20-year-old hiker in those very woods at the same day that I was there, not even 30 minutes after I left. When I was 7 years old, I was showering alone and with the door shut. I was close to being done when suddenly the light, the fan, and the water turned off. There was a moment that I was in darkness. It felt like 3 to 5 seconds, and suddenly everything turned back on. When I looked out of the shower to see who was messing with me, I instantly froze cold. There was a tall and seemingly thick, darker than black silhouette of a being reflecting next to me outside of the shower, but only visible in the mirror. I was petrified and couldn't move or scream, and as quickly as it came, it suddenly vanished. I hurried up and grabbed my clothes and booked it down the stairs to where I attempted to speak to my mum. She told me to wait a minute, I'm on the phone. And so I waited about 2 minutes, and my mum returned from the garage and into the living room where I was seated, silent and confused, after what I just saw, and she said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but your dad passed away." At that moment, I didn't understand death, let alone ghosts or whatever I just saw, but I knew that something was wrong. I was terrified of the upstairs bathroom and would always use it or shower with the door wide open and panic internally if anyone tried to close it. I had a reoccurring nightmare about the bathroom where a monster or human woman would look down at her hands in the mirror and start screaming, and then look up at me still screaming very loudly until eventually I woke up. I spent a lot of time alone as a kid in the basement, but I certainly wasn't always alone. A buddy of mine was with me in the basement playing Guitar Hero one day, when suddenly a white, massive, thick cloud or mist, that's the best way that I can describe it, impossible to look through, zoomed out of one of the rooms to our right and disappeared at the wall. It was very quick, but I asked my friend if he saw that, and he said yes. I saw shadows while I was alone a few times, behind the bar area towards the storage unit, but I always pretended that I didn't see anything and assumed my mind was just playing tricks on me because I knew that I at least was scared of being in that basement. And yet, that's where some of the video games were, and I always did puzzles by myself down there too. But I just always felt like I was being watched. Another moment someone was with me was when I was in the office and my stepdad was helping me with homework, and we both looked up and saw a brown, sort of grey, white, black blur, is the only way that I can describe it, shoot up the stairs. I knew a little better by that age and asked him what did he see, and he responded saying something shot up the stairs. More years went by after my dad's death, and ghostly, shadowy encounters seemed to go away. My mum became an every-night alcoholic, gone 4 to 6 nights a week for years, and my stepdad hated me too. Often we had chaotic battles. I was terribly depressed between 10 to 19 years old. I blamed God for a lot of the problems in my life, constantly tried forming a relationship with the man in the clouds, but always felt rejection and as if everything was continually sort of just getting worse. My mum got caught cheating on him, thanks to me, and what I thought was a blessing with my mum being caught and me being forced into a stranger's couch, yet seeing my mum daily, became an absolute curse. I thought that since she was drinking at home, then that's a good thing. Yet she was overtly mean. Mean beyond logic, and was always hurling insults, trashing the place, and very, very angry at me, even though I really did no wrong. And I could have sworn several dozen times that I saw evil in her eyes, bloodshot red, crackling rude and violent. I've seen my mum crab walk after me while I was trying to get away from her once. She'd call the police on me while I was sleeping after she destroyed parts of the house. She called my PO to say that I was being violent. One day she hurt my brother and convinced him to blame me when questioned at school about it. Lucky me, I was in a temporary mental hospital for kids because she kicked me out and I slept in front of my school. When the teacher and the police asked why I had cigarettes, I responded wrong and said that I was depressed and they took me away. But quite honestly, I think that saved me from assault with deadly weapon charges. And yet, my mum was never arrested, as the truth never came out until a few years later somehow. My ex-stepdad showed me proof that she was apparently arrested the night before with assault with a dangerous weapon with regard to her current husband. Yet no cops connected the dots, and I guess it was just lucky for me that I had a solid alibi. But anyways, new house with the stepdad brought ghostly things as well. So one day, I was sitting on the couch after school and the doorbell rang. I got up, looked outside, and, well, nobody was there. I sat back down and the doorbell rang again, but twice this time. I hurried to the door and looked outside, looked down my street, and nobody was around. The dogs were also weirdly going ballistic this entire time, but when I sat back down, it rang 3 times before I could even sit down again, and I walked outside, walked around my house and back inside, just sort of checking around the house in case I was being pranked or something. Before I could even close that heavier door though, the doorbell rang super fast and didn't stop for a good 10 to 20 seconds. With dogs freaking out, I cussed at the potential ghost or demon that was there. It stopped, but I was definitely spooked by that. Another moment happened when I was outside on the phone talking to my dad's fiancée when he passed, and suddenly from the woods, I hear a faint yet audible help me in a woman's voice. I paused, looked towards the moonlit woods and continued my conversation. Then I heard a woman scream help me in a loud yet agonizing pitch. I lit another cigarette with Miss Joyce on the phone still, and I heard it again, but this time in a man's voice, and louder. It repeated itself this time, seemingly very angry, louder and closer. It sort of sounded like it was no longer in the woods too, but in the backyard, less than 50 feet from me. I knew that something paranormal and dark was happening, but curiosity for answers locked me in place. It screamed in rage one last time, and that's when I just booked it inside. Weirdly though, it sounded like it was next to me, yet all around me at the same time too. I still get goosebumps even sharing this some 12 plus years later. Now, after being kicked out so many times by my mother and never having a real place to go, I eventually became a thief. I stole from unlocked cars, and one day I stole a car even. And it landed me in prison. But the stories, they don't end here. You see, I had my girlfriend over who I was with before prison, and we were again at my mother's new husband's house, and I was going to meet my girlfriend down in the basement, my room, and start a puzzle like I always did. I was talking to my mum when my girl said that she was going downstairs. I quickly finished the conversation and went to follow her. Through the glass door of the basement though, I looked down and I saw my girlfriend's pale face staring back up at me from the bottom of the steps, and when I opened the door, she was no longer standing there. I turned on the light and proceeded down the steps, turned on the basement lights and looked around, and she wasn't down there at all. I said her name a few times, and when I went to go back upstairs, my girlfriend was at the top, asking me what I was doing, and I told her what just happened. She said that she had to use the bathroom first, and so she was there. I was puzzled by that, but not scared, I guess. And though this is a new event, I guess, this haunting stuff definitely wasn't. We did do a puzzle for the rest of the night, and then she left and came back the next day. We were in the far back of the basement, doing that said puzzle, and suddenly we hear a sharp shush sound from the opposite end towards the stairs. Slightly confused of what that sound was, not thinking that it was paranormal, we continued on. But again, it just sounded like someone was shushing us. It sounded clear audible, and I joked that maybe it's the furnace. Yet the furnace was a good 15 to 20 feet away. This time we hear someone say "ah," but it moved to the left of the stairs to the basement kitchen area. Again we joked, maybe a rat in the air duct. Again the shushing sound. This time it moved by the furnace area though. And now I knew that something was going on. I scooted closer to her, facing the rest of the basement. We hear the shushing sound again. Like air escaping a tire is the only way that I can describe it. When suddenly, I saw a mirage-like form around the treadmill, and again that shushing sound. It was loud, and it was a 90+ degree angle away from where it started in the first place. I then explained to her I'm feeling rage, like I want to argue, but admit that I have no reason to be angry. Then the shushing sound. This time it was somewhere right in front of us. Then she jumped up and asked what, and she said that it was in her ear. And then the sound again, yet it was directly between us, surprising us both, and we both jumped in fact. I pushed her away from me to go upstairs, and I started calling this thing every name in the book and threatened it with the Bible, and after that, surprisingly, it just never did it again. We got a place in a hotel to be together every day until more money was saved. My mother was too hostile and drunk to be around. There were fights all the time, and my girl witnessed her bad side as well, finally. But at said hotel room, the light would turn on and strangely also the sink. She said that she would see shadows in the dark, but I always said that we were just matrixing sort of shapes in the dark. But I could have sworn that I saw them as well. Surprisingly, since then, nothing much has happened. Yet I just cannot say my life got any better. I've always felt like this thing follows me around, I guess. I know it's not my dad, and I suspect it to be truly evil, yet I just don't really know. I appreciate anyone hearing this, and I've struggled with this stuff for years. I believe the only reason that I believe in God is because I've witnessed this thing too. Yet now my stepdaughter and wife claim to see shadows at night, and I just hope that it's not all starting over again. Maybe I was vulnerable, but I shared a moment with other people, and all I can say is yes, ghosts or demons, I believe that they're real. If you don't, that's okay. I understand. I was once like that too, but for me, all of this is just all too real. Tonight, I saw something that I just cannot wrap my head around, and so I'm coming here to ask for any insight. I have a dog, and we take him outside to a field across our small street so that he can do his business. There is a street light, therefore I didn't have a flashlight, but at the very outskirt of the light's radius, in my left peripheral, I saw something kind of move from left to the further left and looked at it. Whatever it was on 2 legs, a lighter tan sort of coloration, and I know it wasn't a deer as I never saw it on 4 legs, and this may sound a bit silly, but it moved so effortlessly for about 20 feet that I know for a fact that it was not a deer or something like it. Also, it didn't make any noise at all. The only way that I noticed it was by catching it moving, in fact. My dog didn't notice it as he did his business facing the other way. Unfortunately, I didn't see it leave as I looked towards my dog to determine if he was ready to get back to the house, and when I looked back a second later, it was gone without a sound. I didn't start to freak out until I talked to my mum about it. She believes in the supernatural, and sometimes I'll brush her off, but when I got back in with the dog, I told her that there was something weird outside in the field. She asked me if it was standing straight up in a light tan color, and to this I immediately closed the curtains because, to heck with that. I then told her about how it started in a kind of bushy area before moving left, and she corroborated it and described it the exact same way that I did. Also, the way that it moved without a sound and didn't bounce or buckle or anything, just kind of drifted or glided even. Turns out that she saw the exact same thing about 2.5 hours earlier when she had just taken the dog out. I keep trying to tell myself that it must just be a deer that was standing, but I would have known if it was a deer standing up like that. I've seen deer do that before. They don't stand up as long as the thing tonight did, and I didn't see ears or antlers or even a black nose or anything. Even the proportions of what it looked like looked more human than a deer, I guess. But it definitely wasn't a human. Again, it was at the outskirts of the light, but I would have known if it was a deer for sure. So, any insight would be greatly appreciated. I wish that I had made this story up, but unfortunately it's real, and it's right next to our house. It's been 3 years since I moved from a quiet town to a big city. Initially, I slept at my grandparents' house after they both passed away, and then my family rented a corner. At first, there was nothing strange. Since I was little, I have been more sensitive when it comes to the supernatural. Still, there was nothing strange to begin with. Until one day, I had a very strange dream. So one day I dreamed that a child woke me up, a girl with extremely pale skin, a torn and dirty dress, black hair reaching her shoulders. Her skin was full of wounds though, and finally I noticed that she had no eyes. She asked me for help finding the remains of her body in random locations on my street and deserted locations. The dream, like I said, was strange, but I ignored it. After a while, though, I noticed that the smell of an extremely sweet perfume in the kitchen bothered my nose, and it became almost frequent. I know it's not anyone at home, too, because neither my mother nor I like sweet perfumes. And then my room was always the coldest in the house, the only one that was cold even in the heat, even with closed windows and the door closed too. I always thought that it was strange, but nothing very important until there was this day that I had sleep paralysis. My room that day smelled like rotten meat, as if something had been rotting there for centuries. The only thing that I can compare it to is it smelled like blood, rotten blood all over. I remember searching the entire room, but I could never find the source of the smell or where it was coming from. I looked, but there was nothing that I could tell, and then I ended up just giving up, turned the fan towards me to reduce the smell, and eventually I just fell asleep. In short though, I had sleep paralysis where I couldn't move. I remember feeling as if someone was enjoying seeing me suffering, as if there was someone outside of my field of vision laughing in my face. After I woke up, the smell lingered. One day I was playing video games at like 2 or 3 in the morning in the living room. My house has 2 floors, where the second is my parents' bedroom. I was playing a calm game at minimum volume, Detroit Became a Human, when out of nowhere, laughter and noises from 2 children running on the second floor startled me. I thought that they were watching a movie with children up there, and so I ignored it. But I noticed that the film that was playing was Harry Potter, and it was the last film too. I simply thought that it could have been a neighbor, but when I looked at the time it was 3 a.m. Soon after I heard one of them crying and running down the stairs quickly. I remember how I turned my head, hearing the little bare feet hitting the floor of the stairs. It was scary though, because when I looked, there was absolutely no one there. On another occasion, when I had my back to the door, I heard a little girl speak quietly as anyone there. And another moment was when someone did the sort of psst sound to me in my room. I've seen a woman with long black hair as well, tall and wearing a torn dress on the stairs. I thought that it was my mother at first, and so I called her, but it definitely was not my mother, because she was in the kitchen. There was another time when I heard a boy call me, and I've had one other sleep paralysis. The smell of cigarettes and blood is always in my room, and quite honestly, I just don't know what to do about any of this. I had an imaginary friend when I was a child, around the ages of 3 to 7, I believe. His name was Tom Willison. He was a short old man who always wore blue jeans and a black and white plaid flannel. He was a farmer and only showed up to me when I was at my grandma's old farmhouse, built in the late 1800s. That house was definitely haunted. Everyone who has ever been in that house always had a bad feeling. On the farm, animals would die in grotesque and unexplainable ways. My uncle who grew up in that house would have astral projections sometimes, wherein he'd be in the house, but it was almost like hell had taken over or something. My mum used to see a man on fire running up and down the stairs. One bedroom upstairs stayed freezing cold no matter what the temperature was, or how much heat was being pumped in through the vents. The previous owner's teen daughter unfortunately self-deleted in 1965 because, as she said in her note, the man on fire never left her mind and kept taunting her until she couldn't take it anymore. Tom would only ever appear to me in this house, and I never saw him again after my grandma moved to North Carolina in 2009 and put the house on the market. It didn't sell until 2012. The new owners lived there for 2 years before putting it back on the market. And the house, it remains vacant to this day. Tom and I would just hang out, and He would talk to me like an adult, told me that he was a farmer, spent most of the time that he wasn't playing with me taking care of the animals. He was always very nice, and his energy felt safe and inviting. I told my family about my friend Tom, but we always said that he was just my imaginary friend. I can still picture his old wrinkled face and jovial smile clear as day. But do you think that he may have been a spirit? Maybe he lived in the house before my mum, her brothers and parents. I've tried looking his name up, but I can't find anything. Maybe it's Thomas or Tom Willison or Wilson or Willison with a double L or something like that. Or maybe Tom is a middle name. I'd love help or the names of resources that I can use to find any information on him, like death records or obituaries or something like that. If anyone can help me find this information, the farmhouse is on Lincoln Highway in the very northern part of Allen County in the broader Lima, Ohio region. If you can help, then I really appreciate it, and thanks. In early 2023, I was doing a training exercise in the woods of Fort Greg Adams, formerly Lee, VA. On the first night, I was pulling security facing the woodline and saw a long, lanky, at least 7 to 8 foot silhouette of a man that was completely black. It was about 50 to 80 meters away and would peek out slowly from behind a tree and then sprint to another one and repeated this for a solid 5 minutes before I just never saw it again. The sun had not quite started to set yet. I would blink hard and look away, but it was still there, and I didn't believe my eyes at first and thought maybe the shadows of the trees were playing tricks on me, and dismissed it as that before other weird stuff started happening that night, and also over the next couple of days. So the first night, same night as above, my squad and I heard a long shrill scream from the area of the woods that I saw the thing running around. The second night, my team and I spotted a 3-man team moving through the woods, and when we engaged, the team vanished and just weren't there anymore. One of the evaluators came over to us, confused, and asked what we were firing at since they didn't have any OPFAR or opposing forces over there. After we explained what we saw, he said that at least every other rotation that comes through sees a 3-man team in the woods in the same sector that we were pulling security in. On the third night, the OCs, or evaluators, were doing a roll call in the evening, and one of the evaluators that had left early in the day yelled, "It's me, I'm over here," from off in the woodline. I couldn't see anyone there. He had left hours ago, in fact. Needless to say, my team and I kept our sleeping bags pretty close together over those nights. It was a World War I training area, by the way. I'm really not sure if they were spirits or something related to Native American lore or what they were, but I wanted to know if anyone knows any more information about the area or what this actually could have been. If anyone else has had any experiences or had anything similar happen to them up at Greg Adams, then I would genuinely love to hear it. Most of the time when people have supernatural encounters, they're alone, it's dark, and they usually have a reason to be extra alert or paranoid, such as being out in the forest or exploring an abandoned building or something. I've even had some weird experiences myself, which I chalk up to my mind not processing things correctly. One experience, though, it stands out to me as a bit different. You see, 3 summers ago, I worked a job painting apartments. The painting company worked in crews where each crew of people would be assigned a different work site. I was the apartment crew lead, which is basically synonymous with manager. Apartment crew lead was a fast-paced, hectic position, which required 10 to 11 hours a day, managing a crew of the least experienced painters and moving between 3 or 4 work sites every day. All of that is to say that while I'm working, I'm focused, in a bright environment, around other people at all times, and my body is constantly in motion. It's the very last place that I'd expect to start imagining things, which is why this specific instance really stands out to me. So my crew was about halfway through repainting a 2-bedroom apartment. I had finished rolling out the first bedroom and moved to the second, and was about halfway through filling the ceiling. The first thing that I noticed, though, was the distinct, strong scent of vanilla. The paint that we use has no smell, and the primer that we use was PVC, which smells like apples, but we didn't need to use primer in that apartment, so I don't believe the smell was from any painting products. I've smelled vanilla randomly a couple of times in the past, so I assumed at first it could have been an olfactory hallucination, but it was the strongest one that I'd ever had. Anyway, about 15 seconds after I started smelling vanilla, my entire body was suddenly gripped with an almost paralyzing fear. All my hair stood on end. I could feel tears in my eyes, and my sinuses started swelling like I was going to cry or sneeze. My arms started shaking with fear so badly that I couldn't keep the roller steady, so I put it down in the bucket to rest for a bit. It felt like fight or flight, but I just couldn't really figure out what I was going to fight or where my body wanted to run. I turned around to leave the room, and as I turned around, I saw a painting rag drop to the floor a few feet behind me. From the speed at which it accelerated downwards, I think it had been dropped from around the height of my head, although I don't know if it had been floating or what, because all I saw was the fall. We use a lot of rags in apartments for cleaning the ends of like the 6-inch rollers, and they're made from old, cut-up pieces of t-shirts. It was pretty brief, but I definitely saw it falling, and it couldn't have been sitting on anything because the room was empty. So really, I just don't know how it even dropped. The next thing that I heard was a scraping originating from the closet. The closet doors had been taken off so I could see it was empty. The walls were textured with plaster, so it was a pretty distinct and erratic scraping sound. Whatever it was, it started in the closet area, and then one distinct scrape started traveling, coming towards me, across the ceiling, and one started coming towards me across the wall. There were 100% different scrapes because I could hear 2 different scraping pitches between the ceiling and the wall, and in my mind it sounded like how I would imagine it would sound if someone had been walking while scraping their fingernails with one hand on the wall and one on the ceiling. Well, I didn't stick around. I left the room quickly, and the noise, fear, and the smell all stopped. But I still had a lot of residual adrenaline in my system, obviously. Talking with my 2 co-workers who were finishing painting the kitchen, they had also heard the scraping but didn't seem to notice it, as there's usually a lot of scraping and noise going on anyway. Weirdly enough, the 6-inch roller makes an almost identical noise when it's edging on a ceiling line. But we were painting ceilings that day, so we weren't edging ceilings at all, and it distinctly came from 2 different places. I'm pretty skeptical of ghosts or spirits or anything like that, but I just cannot for the life of me think of an explanation for it all. My only explanation is that I had hallucinated all of it somehow, but that just doesn't really explain the scraping. I don't have any mental illnesses or anything, and if you have any thoughts or explanations, then please do prove me wrong, because I would love to know that this isn't paranormal. Also, I haven't had anything similar since then, so I just really don't know what it was. When I was 14, me and my 2 brothers and mum moved homes. It was a council house in my hometown of Lee, Greater Manchester, and it took us about a month to decorate and get settled in when we all started hearing noises coming from upstairs. It sounded like footsteps and switches being turned on and off. At the time, we had 3 cats and they were all very hesitant to go upstairs, and when we could hear the noises, the cats would sort of look up and follow the sound. If we picked any of the cats up to take them upstairs, they would always struggle with us and make it clear that they did not want to go up there. After several months of living there, though, the noises would get more frequent, and then one night my mum said that she was in bed reading, and she felt one side of her bed dip down, and it felt like someone was sitting at the side of her. After being there for 4 years, we all sort of got used to it, I guess, and the noises seemed to settle down, and even the cats would venture upstairs sometimes too. One of them would even sleep in me and my brother's bedroom that we had at the time, and I shared a room with my younger brother. When I was 18 though, My older brother moved out, and my mum got a job managing a pub, and she moved into a flat above it. So it was just me and my younger brother and cats living there now. I quickly moved into my older brother's old room, which was my first time having my own room. I quickly made it my own, and my younger brother used the extra space in his room to get a weightlifting bench. He didn't use it much though, and he would use his clothes on hangers on the bar and that. And this played a part in what happened next. So one night, I had gone to bed as normal at about 10 p.m, and I quickly fell asleep. After a few hours, I was woken up by a loud sound from my brother's room. I quickly jumped out of bed and opened my brother's door, and the cat came running out, and my brother had clearly just woken up as well. I immediately noticed that the clothes my brother had hung on his barbell were swaying back and forth, and the sound that had woke us up was the bar that had 60 kilos on it, plus the clothes, had been picked up and dropped back down. We were both a bit freaked out because that was the loudest thing we had heard from the house, but thankfully nothing like that happened again, until a time when my younger brother had gone to Spain with my mum, and I was on my own in the house, but I had booked a trip with friends to Ibiza. The night before our flight, I asked one of my friends to stay at my house because he was a heavy sleeper and was difficult to wake up, and we didn't want him to be late for the flight. He came to my house at around 4 p.m. I had already told him that we might hear the footsteps upstairs, but I don't think that he believed me. As it was summer, it was a very warm day, so I had the back door open to let some breeze in, and we were both just sort of sat in the living room. And then the footsteps started. My friend knew that there was only us in the house because anybody else would have had to have walked past us to go upstairs. Then the footsteps got louder, a lot more than usual in fact, and then all of a sudden it sounded like a very large person was running down the stairs. Well, we both ran out of the house before whatever it was reached the bottom step. My friend refused to go back in, and I reluctantly went back in to get my passport and luggage and to feed the cats and leave them some water because my older brother would come back the next day to feed them until my younger brother came back too. Nothing much happened after that. I speculate that whatever it was used to me and my brother's presence and didn't like new people in the house or something. About 2 years later, we moved out of that house and a new tenant moved in, and about 6 months later, the new tenant went into my mum's pub and asked if we experienced any strange things in the house. My mum ended up telling them the truth, but told them that it was harmless, it seemed anyway, and that they will get used to it. So, this started on one of those meet new friends apps. I'm not just a huge loser, I swear. I moved to my current city during the pandemic and have a work from home position, so it just hasn't been the prime circumstances for a social life, I guess. In any case, I matched with this random girl. We'll call her Annie. I cannot remember if I saw her first or vice versa. Honestly, I was paying more attention to the profiles than the pictures, and she seemed okay. Spirituality came up somehow. I can't remember how this happened either, but to be fair, it could have been either of us. I've recently been more seriously following Norse paganism, but it wasn't something that I was seeking to explore with other people. It's mostly a private thing, I guess, not to mention that my own beliefs are more metaphorical than anything. But that doesn't mean that I'm closed to the experience entirely. So when she mentioned having a LGBTQ neurodivergent pagan femme coven, I was like, wow, okay, that's either very specific or very broad. But hey, why not? Maybe it'll be fun. So we agreed to meet first before I went to the event. One weird thing though that stuck out in our text conversation was that her partner was in some bizarre Scientology rehab. At first, I assumed that this was a place where one recovers from Scientology, but I did ask her if her partner was a Scientologist, and I never got an answer. In any case, we only met for an hour to have some coffee. I think more red flags would have popped up if I'd had more time, because the little things that went off on my radar were things that weren't that weird, I guess. Like, there were explanations, or I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. And me being stupid, didn't ask again about the Scientology thing. I kept meaning to Google Scientology rehab, but kept, well, just forgetting to do it really. I've since Googled it, and cannot find anything about a rehabilitation for ex-Scientologists, so I wish that I had done that sooner. There were, however, other things that really stuck out. They're relatively benign out of context, but putting everything together in retrospect made me feel, well, pretty dumb, I guess. For instance, she wouldn't answer any direct questions about herself, and not for a lack of asking too. I'm the kind of person who is conscious of when the attention is all on me, so it made me uncomfortable, and I didn't learn anything about her really. Most of what she said had to do with her spiritual awakening. Her spiritual awakening itself sounded weird too. She said that she had a realization that she was like a lighthouse that was drawing people toward their personal enlightenment. And okay, I did think that was weird, but like, she's from California. I don't know, maybe that's normal there. I just chalked it up to her personal beliefs in any case, being whatever they were. Reincarnation came up too. Reincarnation is a big part of paganism, although Asatru additionally focuses on ancestors. She told me that she didn't think that she had any past lives and is a new soul, which really just doesn't make a lot of sense, but okay, whatever. Not my circus, not my monkeys. The vaguely supernatural elements that she placed on herself were strange though, but I know a lot of people want to feel special in life, so that didn't mean that I had to believe it. At one point, I told her about this random woman that I met at the pagan festival who tried to con me. She wanted to charge me so that I could be under her wing or whatever. I don't need someone to protect or guide me, so I declined obviously. As I was telling this story though, I could tell Annie was, well, conflicted. Like she wanted to agree, but didn't. Finally, she said something blasé, like how it was only inappropriate because the student should choose the teacher. So I clarified that I didn't want a teacher. Her responses were also very mirroring. I'm not a moron too. I was getting a weird sense that she wasn't being honest with me and that she was telling me things that I wanted to hear, and told myself that she was probably just nervous. I do have a pretty strong personality after all. I am very independent, so I can understand if someone wouldn't want to go up against the things that I said at our very first meeting. I know I'm just dumb at this point, but I didn't want to be paranoid too. I don't trust people easily, and I know that, so I was trying to loosen up and be a bit more chill. But yeah, that was a big mistake. But anyway, so yeah, I go to this thing and immediately it is weird. Immediately, the second that I step foot into that house, I'm very uncomfortable. It's filled with people and completely silent. Everyone is looking at me. I'm sort of laughing and saying hi, and no one is like really responding. And here I am awkwardly dropping my keys and phone while everyone is just watching me. Eventually, I take a seat on this short couch because there's just no room in the large circle. It's a very small living room and there are like 20 people circled up. There's a cushion on the couch, so I just sort of sit on that. The leader starts talking, and as she's going on, I'm looking around at the people there. I was curious, I guess, but out of the corner of my eye, I see the leader trying to look at me. The girl sitting in front of me is sort of partially blocking our view of each other, so the leader is like leaning over to try and meet my gaze. Finally, I felt awkward enough to like shift over so that I was leaning against the arm of the couch. Staying perched on a cushion was pretty uncomfortable by that point, so I sort of shifted off and spread out a bit to be more comfortable. The leader ended the speech with, "So spread out, I guess," which was clearly directed at me. It was said with some humor though, so I wasn't sure what to make of it at first. Everyone introduces themselves though and is their own unique brand of neurodivergent. I have ADHD, but I guess I don't subscribe to labels beyond the requirement to stay medicated. I've been medicated since 2015, so this isn't a new diagnosis for me or anything. That was the only question that we got asked about ourselves, though, beyond our name. The leader guides us through this meditation, and people are making these weird breathing sounds and hums. And I mean, I get it. It's spiritual, right? Unfortunately, my ADHD butt can't focus to save my life, and it's impossible for me to follow the guided meditation. I just don't understand it. I mean, how can anyone with actual attention issues listen past trills and deep nose breathing like this? So I'm sitting there with eyes closed and barely paying attention because I just can't. But I do hear the leader say that we should think of anything that we'd want to ask her or need from her, and that got my attention. What the heck did I need to ask her, other than where the snacks were, because I paid $8 and I don't see a single snack anywhere. Once the meditation ended, though, Annie and the leader walked around to give us material for an activity. Annie gave me 2 long pieces of twine, and the leader gave me 2 sticks. As the leader was handing me the sticks, I asked her where the snacks were, and she was like, in the kitchen on the table where snacks tend to be. I'm a dry, sarcastic person, so I thought it was her brand of humor. I laughed and played along, and went, "Oh, alright, I think I'll find them." Literally, she was deadpan though, unsmiling, and just said, and then walked away. So stupid me thought that she might just be like that, but then I saw her laughing with the other girls and realized something was off. As the activity commenced, she went back over to Amy and started stroking her back, kissing her hair and giving me this creepy smile. Yeah, it was weird. I was really uncomfortable. I wanted to get up and go at this stage, but I couldn't. Why? Because of this activity. The activity was the last straw, but they wanted us to think of something that we wanted to discard that brought us pain. Then they wanted us to feel how bad that thing made us feel, as we slowly twisted the piece of twine around the stick. That's the sort of thing that I would only ever do with my therapist, mind you. Obviously, people were emotionally melting down before long. I wasn't comfortable doing the activity for obvious reasons, so I just sort of sat there awkwardly with the sticks and the string in my lap. I was the only one not doing it, and it was obvious, but because I wasn't doing it, I had the opportunity to watch Annie and the leader, and it was, well, pretty chilling. Annie was doing some weird pyramid thing above her head with her arms. There were a lot of references to her as being a lighthouse or some sort of a guiding figure throughout the meeting. She was the only one who wasn't doing the ritual other than the other leader. They were both running it apparently, and suddenly it occurred to me, as it probably has to all of you already, that Annie had been using this app just to bring people into their group. She was the only person who seemed to know everyone, yet no one there knew each other. Even the name of the group now made sense too. They weren't being specific, they were casting a wide net, I guess you could say. I had this big realization in a handful of seconds, and it made my stomach turn. So yeah, I was done at that point. But I couldn't get up because people were sharing their experiences and stuff, pouring their hearts out. This was the most messed up part though, in my opinion. There's no reason to do a releasing ceremony that forces people to feel their trauma like this, especially at the very first meeting. It's also inherently manipulative because it requires people to let their guard down. Then they can save the day by showing people how to release the very same pain that they just inflicted on themselves. But this isn't the fault of people there, so I didn't want to disrespect them or anything. Like, people were literally sobbing on top of my shoes that I had left by the door. I had to wait for the best time to ask someone to pass them to me, but finally I got up and told everyone that I had to go to the car, and I just took off. I texted Annie and told her that I wouldn't be back and that I hoped that she found her people. My advice to all of you guys, though, is to just make sure you're not her people. Be really careful of any spiritual ceremony or practice that demands vulnerability from you, especially directed by people who don't even know you beyond a name. It was a very creepy experience to be, well, a part of a cult like this for a moment. Like I said, it was extremely manipulative. It really didn't sit right with me, and I have a sneaking suspicion that whatever this is, it's not going to end well. To start this off, I live in southern Minnesota, in basically the middle of nowhere. For privacy's purposes, I'll be using fake names, and it was around 9 p.m. when this took place. So, I was with my friends Ali and Ella. We were driving around in my golf cart and went to a spot where I would normally hike. It was sort of a large valley, I guess. Not sure how else to describe it, but it was an abandoned construction zone that was never finished. We were exploring in the open, just looking for cool rocks to take home. There was some sort of a bird that kept following us. Every time we would approach it, it would go fly away, but the second that we would keep going, it appeared again. It just wouldn't leave us be, but we didn't think too much of it. It sounded almost like it was making warning calls, perhaps, but Ella thought that she had heard a man's voice but brushed it off. This is actually pretty important to what happened next, but we decided to head to the other part of the valley, which was close to a nearby river. It was basically a clearing surrounded by trees with a big mound of dirt and rubble in the middle. We stopped because I had said that there were always some cool stuff to find there. So I parked the golf cart, and right as we were about to get off, I get this overwhelming feeling of danger and feeling of doom. It felt like my stomach had dropped to the floor. Then Ella points at the top of the mound, and on the top was some sort of creature just standing there. It was tall and skinny, short hair, coyote-looking ears, short neck, and abnormally long body. It was too small to be a deer, but way too big to be a coyote. It stood there too, just sort of staring at us. It didn't move, and I froze completely, unaware of my friend screaming at me to drive away. We all had a very strong feeling of danger and fear, and we just had instant bad vibes that something was wrong. Eventually, though, I caught myself and I quickly hightailed it out of there, and when we were driving away, it just sort of stood there, slowly turning its neck as we drove past. I would like to stress too that whatever this was, it was not a deer. I got a pretty good look at it, and it wasn't anything that I'd ever seen before, in fact. We are speculating that the bird was a warning sign and we saw something that we really weren't supposed to see. We're pretty much in shock and we have no idea what to do about any of this, so if you have any ideas as to what we should do, then please do help us. I'm sort of losing my mind over this, and I just don't know what to think and don't know what to do. This happened in 2019. I was 25 at the time. I was living with my parents, sister, and my partner, as we were saving up to buy a house at this point. My parents' house was in a relatively big city in California, which has a big homeless population. The house was on a street that dead-end to a park, which was a common hangout spot for homeless people. There were always homeless people walking by our house, of which most of them never caused any problems. Now, the other piece of backstory that you need to know before I get into this is that my sister is special needs. She, despite being 19 at the time, appeared both physically and mentally more like a 10-year-old, I guess you could say. This particular day, my mum and I had taken our dogs to the vet. My partner was at work, and my dad was working in the backyard. This left my sister kind of alone in the house. When my mum and I came back from the vet, my sister opened the door and greeted us, saying, "This is my friend Julia." And behind her stood a woman who looked like she was probably in her 20s. She had my sister's socks on and was eating food from our house. This was confusing because the woman could have been a friend of my sister's, as she was in a lot of programs for adults with special needs, and we didn't necessarily know all of her friends. But my sister also has a limited vocabulary to explain situations with. So my mum says, "Oh, you know my daughter? Julia says we're getting to know each other, and that was a huge nope. My mum says, how are you getting to know her? Julia answers, well, I just live on the corner. You live around the corner? No, I live on the corner. I needed a tampon, so your daughter let me in. At this point, my mum is speechless. I've never seen her speechless, in fact, in my life, and I'm whispering to her, get her out. Julia is kind of pacing around grabbing more food from our kitchen. She's acting erratically like she's on drugs. I again tell my mum to get her out. My mum says, I know that, but if she has a knife or a gun or something, I need to do it carefully. My mum follows Julia into the kitchen and says, I'm so sorry, you need to leave because I need to go run an errand. Julia, she ignores this request. At this point, I look in our bathroom where there is a pile of Julia's things. Again, my mum tells her that she needs to leave. Julia agrees and goes into our bathroom and locks the door. She was in there for a while. It felt like forever, in fact, but maybe it was around 5 minutes. We were pretty certain that she was doing drugs in there, but finally Julia has all of her stuff and she leaves, taking socks and snacks with her. I run to get my dad and we all debrief. It seems like, from what we can get out of my sister, is that Julia knocked on the door and asked for a tampon, in which my sister lets her in, trying to be helpful. Julia then realizes that she's practically alone with what looks like a child and takes full advantage, stealing clothes and shoes from us. We have a serious talk with my sister and tell her that she can never open doors for strangers like that ever again. And we spend the next few months worrying that Julia spread the news that our house was an easy house to get into. This happened in northwest Houston. I've never really spoken about this one, as much as I had a much more frightening experience that takes precedence in my memory. But this one, it is weird enough to ask you guys what happened. So, I've only had one other paranormal experience, and after doing some research, I believe it was demonic. Well, there was another experience around the same time, within a few months of each other, and no paranormal experiences before or after these two, where me and my middle school friend were having a sleepover. We got a craving for snacks, and decided to walk to the closest gas station. The walk was about 1.5 miles and included a walk through the woods behind our neighborhood. We cut across the creek and turned right, which led to a road, but the road was at least 3/4 mile away with dense woods on both sides of us. As we're walking, we were about 1/4 mile into this long stretch of woods. All of a sudden, this giant white figure steps out of the woods to our left. We both freeze in our tracks without saying a word, confirming that we both saw it, and it stopped and stared right at us. It was probably about 50 to 60 feet away from us, but it was absolutely massive, so it seemed a bit closer than that, I suppose, but I got instantly flooded with chills, and we both turned around and started sprinting back to where we crossed the creek, repeatedly saying, "What was that?" We never looked back out of pure fear, and all we could seemingly do was just, well, run. Whatever it was, though, it was built like a human, I guess, standing on 2 legs and had distinct yellowish eyes. It was easily, and I mean easily, 9 feet tall, and we don't have any sort of animals that would have resembled that in the area. Me and that old friend, we lost touch, unfortunately. This was like 14 years ago, but I really wish I could reach out to him to talk about that moment again, because I know that he still remembers it just like I do. But can anyone add some insight? I find it sort of weird that I had 2 paranormal experiences within months of each other, and nothing before or since then. I get chills just talking about this and reliving that memory, but I'm really curious if anyone has any ideas. Just to clarify too, we were not drunk, high, or anything, stone cold sober. we were too young at the time to do any of that stuff yet, and so there was nothing like that involved. So again, if you have any idea as to what this was, then please do let me know. So my friends and I, who I'll refer to for anonymity's sake as A, E, S, and D, have been getting into paranormal investigations over the past few years. We aren't professionals by any means, nor do we claim to be. It's just something that we enjoy doing whenever we're able to get together. We've gone to a few supposedly haunted locations and done some investigations, but nothing prepared us for what we experienced here. So one day, we were discussing where we should go for our next paranormal investigation. We had just finished another investigation a couple of nights prior, so we were still feeling pretty brave from that. As we were discussing where we should go, one of our friends suggested that we should check out this old abandoned school in rural Tennessee. We had heard stories about this school from videos on YouTube, and from just online searches as well. If you know the story about the boy who was bullied to death and buried underneath the floorboards, then you'll know what school that I'm referring to. If you don't know the story, then here's a brief summary. A young boy was cornered in the boys' bathroom at this school by a bully, apparently. The bully beat him up so badly that he ended up succumbing to his injuries and died on the spot. The bully, in a panic, realizing what he had just done, decided to pull up some of the floorboards with his pocket knife and stash the body underneath them. Because of how brutal it was, it is said that something very dark and malevolent is haunting the school, as well as the boy. Some even speculate that this dark spirit is what drove the bully to take it so far and kill the boy in the first place. Sadly, our friend A wasn't able to come with us on this investigation, so I invited another one of my friends, who I'll refer to as H. H wasn't really into the paranormal, I guess you could say, like the rest of us are, but agreed to come anyways, just to hang out and to have something to do. So we all got into our cars and drove to this school, hoping to have some paranormal experiences and maybe even catch us some paranormal evidence that we could show off online. When we got to the school, we quickly realized that the pictures and the videos that we had seen online did not do the real thing justice. It was really creepy. The entire place was covered in shrubbery, vines, and graffiti. The windows had been busted out and the doors were off their hinges, presumably from all the local kids looking to get a rush by breaking into and exploring a creepy abandoned school. We walked around the school and eventually found the entrance to the basement, which apparently you are not supposed to go into, especially the boiler room. Not just because the whole building was on the brink of collapse, but also because that's where it primarily lives. So, of course, that's one of the first places that we wanted to go. We walked around the basement and did some exploring, just to survey the area and to get a better idea of where we wanted to begin our investigation. We eventually did find the boiler room, and at first glance it didn't seem like anything special, just some broken down equipment, graffitied walls, trash thrown all over the place, and a random school chair sitting in the corner. E laughed at some point and made the comment, must not be a very powerful spirit if this is where it has to live. We all let out a bit of a chuckle in agreement, and continued on our way through the basement. Thinking back now, that may have not been the best comment to make about this thing and its home. We exited the basement and went into the main area of the school. The main area? It really wasn't any better than the basement. Graffiti and trash were everywhere. The ceiling was falling in, the floor was collapsing in some areas. We explored the halls eventually, some classrooms, the gym, and we even found the bathroom where the bullied boy was supposedly buried underneath the floorboards. After exploring for a little while longer, we decided to start our investigation proper. We set up a couple of cameras, motion sensor lights, and voice recorders in some of the classrooms, the hall, and the bathroom. As we were doing our investigation, 3 of us were in one of the classrooms, while myself and H were in the hall right outside. The 3 of us that were in the classroom, we were just playing around with some dowsing rods and a spirit box. If you don't know what dowsing rods are, they are basically 2 copper rods that can spin freely and They're used as a way for spirits to communicate with you, either by crossing the rods or pointing. The spirit box, that's a device that quickly cycles through radio waves and allows spirits to talk through the frequencies. Now, as they were asking their questions in the classroom, myself and H, we were staring down the hall. At the end of this hall is what we assumed was a staircase, but we couldn't be too sure because we couldn't reach that area due to the floor having collapsed. As myself and our friend were looking down this hall, we suddenly heard a loud bang come from the far end where the staircase was. We quickly shined our lights in the direction of the noise, but we didn't see anything. We kept watching for a minute, just in case something or someone came out. But after a couple of minutes of nothing, we sort of just assumed that it must have been an animal or a rat or something like that. Eventually, I made my way into the classroom with the others while H stayed in the hall. As we were asking our questions and hoping for a response through the dowsing rods or the spirit box, I noticed H in the hall. He was all of a sudden ghostly white and fixated on the area where we had heard the noise prior. I asked him what was wrong, if he was okay, to which he says, "I don't want to freak you guys out, but I could have swore that I just saw someone poke their head out from around that corner and look right at me." We were all kind of like, "Oh, it's probably just your mind playing tricks on you," but he was still very insistent on what he saw. Now, we had seen and heard things during our investigations before, but something about the way H looked had us all a little bit spooked now. H insisted that we move on to another area, so we obliged him and went back to the main foyer where we had entered. We were standing there talking about where we should go next when we hear what sounded like a child's laugh coming from the classroom where we had just been. We all instinctively shut up and froze in place. Finally, our friend S broke the silence. What was that? Eventually, he built up the courage to go and see what it was. He started making his way back to the classroom when something told me that it really wasn't safe for him to go back in there. I quickly grabbed his arm and said, "Hey man, I don't think that that's a good idea." To which he brushed it off and proceeded to head towards the classroom. A split second later, we heard a loud crunch and a crash come from the room, so we all ran to see what it was. When we reached the classroom, we were horrified to see that the floor had collapsed right where we had been standing moments earlier. Had something not told me that it wasn't safe, I wouldn't have grabbed E's arm, and honestly, he probably would have been at the bottom of the school right now. If not dead, then at least very hurt. As we stood there, in shock of what had just happened, we began to feel, I guess, very grateful that the floor hadn't collapsed while we were all standing in there. We decided that, honestly, that was enough of the classrooms, and we made our way into the gym. The floors felt much safer in there, that's for sure. We continued our investigation, and thinking back now, we probably should have left after our friend almost died, but we were dumb and we wanted to go on. I took the dowsing rods and began asking those generic questions. Is anyone there? Can you tell us your name? Etc. Eventually I asked the question, can you point to where you are? And to my surprise, the rods pointed in the direction of the darker corner of the gym. Guys, come here, I shouted to my friends. I think I'm getting something. As my friends came closer, the rods began to move as well. Now they weren't pointing in the corner anymore. They were seemingly following E. Now might be a good time to mention too that this is the same guy who almost fell through the floor, and the guy who made the silly comment in the basement about this thing's home. I'm not saying that he was being targeted by this thing, but it sure seemed like it at this point. It was weird too, because no matter where he moved, the rods, they seemed to follow him. He went left, they followed. He went right, they followed. He ran around me and they followed full circle. This creeped us out beyond belief, so we wanted to know why the rods were following him. As we asked our questions as to why the rods were doing this, Someone eventually asked, "Are you mad at him?" And then, in an instant, the rods went straight and unnaturally still, and the room, it felt really eerily quiet. So quiet, in fact, that it was as if we had fallen deaf almost instantaneously. I got this insanely bad feeling as if something very evil had just entered the room. I get goosebumps thinking about this. A few seconds later, I felt something strong physically grab the ends of the rod in my hands. Whatever was grabbing them began thrashing them back and forth with enough force to move my whole body, as if they were trying to break them from my grip. As this was happening, noises started coming from all around the school too. It sounded like doors and lockers were slamming, things being thrown down the halls and all around us, and screaming. Though admittedly the screaming may have been coming from us, but it didn't help our situation by any means, that's for sure. We were all terrified. We had never experienced anything like this before. Then H, the same guy who saw the thing at the end of the hall, pointed in the direction of the dark corner of the gym and let out a guttural, blood-curdling scream. We didn't even bother to look and see what he was pointing and screaming at. The only thing in our mind at this point was get out. We all quickly grabbed our things simultaneously and sprinted out of the school back to our cars. We got in and we peeled out of there as fast as we could. Eventually, we met back at my place, still obviously shaken up by what had just happened. After taking a while to process this experience and decompress a bit, we asked H what he had seen. And he tells us that as everything was going on, he looked into the corner of the gym and saw something horrifying. He described it as seeing a massive thing, probably 7 feet tall, standing in the corner. It had allegedly unnaturally long arms that were spread out wide. Its head had long devilish horns, and its mouth was open so wide that you could probably fit your head into it. He said, though, that on top of that, on its unusually large mouth, was also a smile, more evil than you could ever imagine. And knowing that something like that was so close to us, honestly, is just bone-chilling. In my opinion, we were lucky to make it out alive that day. We've never returned to that school, and we have no intention on ever going back to. As far as we're concerned, if that old school was demolished and the rubble was burned, they'd be doing the world a favor. Maybe it would destroy, or at the very least trap whatever that thing was in there for good. If you know the school, then I highly suggest that you never go inside, or even go onto the property, in fact. Honestly, save yourself from the trauma. Believe what you want, obviously, but that night for us will forever be burned into our minds. So, to give some context, this story takes place at a campground where myself and others have had some strange experiences, but those stories are going to have to wait for another time. When I was around 12 years old, though, I accompanied my father to our family's longtime campground where he was going to perform some lawn care work before the camping season began later that month. We were probably going to be there for a while, so I asked my dad if I could invite my friend to come with us, just to keep me entertained while he finished up some mowing. To my delight, my dad agreed and said that he could come. For privacy purposes, I'll be referring to my friend as D. Now, D and I had been friends for years at this point, and had many of the same interests. Among those common interests was our curiosity for the unknown and the paranormal. So while my dad was busy mowing, I suggested to D that we should try to do some EVP recordings in the cafeteria, just to see if we could capture anything, to which he happily agreed. The cafeteria was a 2-story cement and brick building, with the upstairs being where the kitchen and dining hall were, and the basement, otherwise known as the dungeon. It was an old dorm that was being mostly used for storage at this stage, with a very big and dimly lit storage room as well, a long hall, a smaller storage room, and a rather large bathroom. The whole atmosphere down there always gave me the creeps too. Anyway, myself and Dee made our way into the dining hall and sat down at one of the tables. We got out my old flip phone and started using the voice recording app to see if we could catch any voices or other unexplained sounds. We took turns asking questions and waiting for responses for about 5 minutes, but to no avail, until we heard some noises coming from the dungeon. We discussed going down there to see what the noise was, but we chalked it up to being an animal, since it wasn't very uncommon for animals to get into the buildings at this campground. So for the most part, we just brushed it off, I guess you could say. We continued with our makeshift EVP session for about another 5 minutes, until we heard another noise coming from the same dungeon. But this time, we both froze in place. We looked at each other in shock, and, what were we hearing? My friend looks at me and says, "Is that chanting?" At this point, we were both pretty freaked out, and we decided to exit the cafeteria and just go on a walk. As we were walking, we were speculating what the sounds we heard could have been. I did my best to come to some logical explanation as to what we were hearing. There was no way that there were people down there. We would have seen or heard them beforehand, right? As we continued our walk, we ended up about 60 yards from the backside of the cafeteria, where we could see a door with a window that led into the dungeon. We both looked at the door and didn't see anything weird, so we kept walking. I made the mistake of saying to Dee, how scary would it have been if we looked at the door and saw someone looking back, as a bit of a joke. And immediately, I kid you not, after saying this, we both looked back at the door, fully expecting nothing to be there. But to our horror, something was there. Not just something, though. There were multiple people. I instantly froze in place, terrified of what I was seeing. There were 3 people that we could see, and they appeared to be in what looked like cloaks of some sort. 1 in a red cloak and 2 in black on the other side, staring directly back at us. One of the scarier parts, though, was that I never even saw their faces, just the hoods that they were wearing. Before I could even ask Dee if he was seeing what I was seeing, I looked to see him in full sprint down the road about 50 yards in front of me. So instinctively, I started running too. We ran to tell my dad what we had heard and seen, to which he pretty much brushed it off, but said that he would go and check it out just to ease our minds. Now, my dad is not a man to be messed with. He was a 6'5" cop and almost 300 pounds, so just his sheer size would be enough to pretty much intimidate or scare someone off if they were trespassing. My dad went and checked the dungeon as we watched from a distance. He came back out saying that everything was fine and he didn't see or hear anyone in there. We were still a little bit freaked out, but glad that he had said that there was nothing to worry about and nobody was there. So we continued with our day until it was time to leave, but we definitely steered clear of the cafeteria. Flash forward about 8 years, and I had mostly forgotten about the whole thing. But one night, my older brother, who was older than me by about 7 years, and we were up late one night sitting on our parents' back deck, just reminiscing about the times that we had growing up. We eventually got to talking about spooky stuff that had happened to us, and that brought us to talking about our experiences at the campgrounds. I proceeded to tell my brother the story about Dee and I seeing and hearing the people in the cloaks in the dungeon. My brother then gets a sort of very perplexed and somewhat scared look on his face and says to me, "You're joking, right?" To which I said, "No, I wish I was. You can ask Dee and he'll tell you the same thing." My brother, getting more and more freaked out by the story that I'm telling him, proceeds to tell me something that, honestly, has haunted me to this day. He tells me that when I was about 2 years old, apparently a satanic cult had broken into the campground. The cultists had gone through every dorm and the church, gathered all of the Bibles, and taken them to the field, which was directly on the other side of the road from where myself and Dee had seen the people in the window. He tells me that they had burned a massive pentagram into the field, piled all the Bibles in the middle, and allegedly set them on fire. The next day, a couple of workers had gone to the campgrounds to do some regular maintenance, and they had found what had been done. They called the police, and according to my brother, they not only found the pile of burnt Bibles inside of this massive pentagram, but they also found the remains of dead animals all around it in a sort of ritualistic pattern. Nobody had heard or seen anything more about the cult since then, until I told my dad and my brother what Dee and I had experienced. Flash forward to today, so 11 years since what we had experienced, and nobody has heard or seen anything else that we know of anyway. So, did Dee and I just imagine what we had experienced, or did we happen to interrupt another cult gathering of some sort? After hearing what my brother told me and comparing it to what we saw, I find it hard to believe anything other than the latter. I was about 13 when this happened. My parents were gone for a weekend for a trip together and left me and my two siblings home alone. Our grandma was a minute down the road if we needed her, and my sister was 18 at the time, so it really wasn't a big deal for a night or two. I was in the spare bedroom, which had a couch, TV, and Xbox 360 in it, that I was really into playing or used to watching Netflix on. It was the summer of 2015, by the way. I was watching some random show. Knowing me, it was probably the Vampire Diaries at the time, and it was maybe 9 or 10 at night. And that was when I heard it. 3 knocks on the window. I ignored it at first, just thinking that it was a little bit weird, and just keep scrolling through the memes on my iPod and watching TV when it happened again, which is about the time when I started freaking out. The windows in the room had curtains over them, so I didn't see who it was, but I knew that I needed to get out of there now. I went to get my older sister and told her what was happening, and as I moved through the house, the knocking on our windows followed me, knocking 3 times every single time. She and my brother heard the knocking on the glass too, and started freaking out with me. My sister had me and my brother hide in the corner of our kitchen that doesn't have any windows looking in, and made sure our front door was locked. We called our parents and then our grandma. They had us call our next door neighbor to take a quick look around. He was a Vietnam vet in his 60s at the time, and we knew that he had guns and training if needed. But he didn't find anything. We were all unsettled the rest of the night, but we knew that our parents were coming home the next day, so we weren't too worried. Fortunately, everything was okay, and it never happened again. But to this day, about a decade later, it still bothers me not knowing who it was. I have 3 theories, which was progressively less probable, I guess. It could have been a man that was doing horrible things to me through the summer or winter, but I don't think he'd be bold enough to get that close to my house, not knowing who was home. That's a whole nother story. And the final option was my biological father, who was barely in the picture at the time. Again, I don't know who it was, but the whole thing was really creepy, and I'm glad that my sister was there that day because, honestly, I don't know what I would have done without her. We've had our cabin in the mountains since 1966. It was my father's heaven on earth because he grew up close by and had to leave home at a young age to go to VA school for the deaf and blind. He had detached retinas. Anyway, he died in 1995 of leukemia, but made my sisters and I promise that we'd take care of the cabin before he passed. In 2005, my sister who lives in Texas called me on a Saturday, asking if my other sister and I were at the cabin. I said, no, but we're going next weekend. Why? And she said that she had gotten a missed call from the cabin landline on her cell phone, called back and no answer. I was like, it's possible our uncle was over checking on stuff, but I'd cancelled long-distance service a few months prior because we only used the phone for local calls and to have in case of 911. So I thought maybe they took it off the bill, but LD was still active on the phone. I called the cabin number and no answer, so called my uncle's house. He answered and said that he hadn't been over there since the last time we visited, but he'd go check on it just in case our neighbor was over there for a problem. It's a remote house and you have to go through the neighbor's land to reach it. After a while, he called back saying that apparently nobody was there and he had tried to call me from there but couldn't because there was no LD. He also checked with our neighbor and they hadn't been there either. I called my sister back and I told her that it couldn't have come from the cabin because our uncle hadn't been there and he verified that LD wasn't working anyway. She was adamant though that it came from that number, said that it was in her call history even. We both ended up half-jokingly saying that it must have been Daddy calling her. When we hung up, I laid my cell phone down beside me and said out loud, "Daddy, call me." Sounds stupid, I know, but I felt jealous that he would call her and not me. And I kid you not, my phone immediately rings, and the screen says unknown caller. I was like, oh heck no, thinking that this couldn't be happening. With chills and bumps on my arms, I picked up and I could hear nothing but static and what sounded like several people's voices from far away. I kept saying hello, hello, but just could hear nothing but static and those faraway voices. After a few seconds comes this loud voice like someone had the receiver right up to their mouth, but it didn't sound like my father, saying like mimicking the sound of a buzzer going off when a wrong answer is given on the game show or whatever, sort of like gotcha, and the call disconnected. I called my sister back immediately, absolutely freaking out at this point. She said that it has to be Dad trying to warn us that something is wrong. We really didn't know what to think, and it almost felt like we both had imagined it all, but we could see the calls on our phones, the call history. She said maybe he called her instead of me and my sister because she would have paid attention to a VA number, living in Texas, whereas my sister and we might not have paid attention. She insisted, though, that we check everything out when we went back up there, and was convinced that he was trying to send a warning. The next weekend, my other sister and I went to the cabin for our already planned trip. Our uncle always goes over and opens up the house and starts a fire, so it'll be warm when we get there. When we arrived that day, he said that he decided to clean out the flue, and good thing I did because it was full. Only had an opening of about an inch. That thing could have burned down the house, you know. To this day, we are convinced that our father was warning my sister about the chimney flue being blocked. It still gives me chill bumps when I think of the phone calls, but I kick myself for not taking screenshots of them. I do that automatically now for, well, so many things, but 20 years ago, not so much. If it had only been me, I know I would have thought that I must have dreamed it, because it just feels, well, really surreal, I guess. Almost like living in a time warp. I was 19 at the time, around 2009. I had a weekday off work. I decided to go to the beach by myself and brought my guitar along. This was rural Northern California, where the beaches are below cliff faces and usually empty of other people. Now, there was a particular beach where someone had built a driftwood hut into the side of a steep cliff, with the beach below about maybe 100 feet. You can just barely see the roof of the structure from the highway. I'd always wanted to check it out, so I parked my car on the highway and made my way along a narrow trail to the hut. It was a beautiful day, so I set up near one of the hut's windows and was playing my guitar and watching the waves. Suddenly, I hear someone else walking down the trail. I'm a little bit nervous, but figure that it must be well known to locals or something. But then enters the man. Immediately, I get a major creepy vibe from him. He's in his late 50s, overweight, unshaven, thick glasses, sloppy, dirty clothes, sweatpants and a dirty white shirt, but not homeless or anything. He immediately initiates conversation with me. First, just sort of nice pleasantries, talking about the view, the weather, but then he starts asking personal questions, like, do you live around here? Do you go to college? Are you working today? Are you here with anyone? I answer very vaguely and am starting to get uncomfortable and feeling sort of trapped. The hut is very long and narrow, and there's no way for me to get to the trail leading back to the car without passing by him. At this point, I only say the bare minimum, trying to show him that I'm really not interested in conversation. I look away and he suddenly snaps a picture of me on his disposable camera. I ask him what he's doing, and he says that he wants to show his friends back home how beautiful the girls in California are. At this point, I start brainstorming my options. I could try to run past him, but I will have to get close. I can jump out the windows of the hut towards the ocean, but it's a pretty steep cliff face to the beach, 100 feet or so below. My gut started telling me that this was a dangerous situation, but I was frozen. I didn't know what to do. Then he tells me that he needs to go to his truck to get something about his camera, but I knew that he had already used his camera. He leaves the hut, but there's still no way for me to get to my car without passing him. I'm brainstorming what to do, but I kept thinking maybe I'm just overreacting. I quickly run to the entrance of the hut, but he's already making his way back down the trail towards me. And this is the gross part. He has a very large and very visible, well, you can probably guess, in his sweatpants, and he also has something under his arm. I quickly run to the opposite side of the hut and jump out the window, sitting on the ledge of the steep cliff. And in that split second, where I had to make a decision, I look in the sky and see two hawks fighting each other. I had just read The Alchemist, and if you remember, the universe sends the main characters omens and signs. One particular omen in the book is two fighting raptors, which ended up meaning something bad was coming and to run. I took that to heart for whatever reason, and in that moment, I knew that I had to scale the steep cliff to the beach below. I decided that I'd rather die falling or die swimming across the river. The beach below was also the estuary to a large river, than find out what that creep was planning. So I started scaling the steep cliff. He ran to the edge and asked where I was going. He yelled for me to come back. Adrenaline kicked in so hard that I made it down surprisingly fast without falling or even getting hurt. Luckily, he didn't follow. He stood there the entire time yelling for me to come back. I was visibly shaking when I got down to the bottom. I made it to the beach and hid in some vegetation for what felt like forever, but was probably only 20 minutes. I finally decided that it was safe to walk down to the beach where the actual trail was. I could see a man standing at the top, and it wasn't him. I could tell by the silhouette, but I was still terrified that he had an accomplice. I decided to risk it and run up and ask for help, and it, luckily, ended up being a park ranger. I quickly told him the whole story. We walked to the hut, and by this point, the creep was gone. He put out a radio call so enforcement would be on the watch out, and I filed a police report in the end. Then I left abruptly, and I left my purse and all my stuff in the hut. When I left abruptly, I left my purse and all my stuff in the hut. It was still all there when I returned with the ranger, but I was terrified that he went through my belongings and saw my address or my ID or whatever. For months afterward, too, I was honestly scared to be alone at home. Honestly, too, I genuinely think that the creep, he would have done something awful if I had stayed in that hut that day. I think he might have gone to his truck for a weapon or a rope or something, but I'm not sure since I couldn't see what he was tucking under his arm. At 19, I didn't know to trust my gut. These days, I know not to worry about what anyone thinks if I feel danger and the need to bolt. I'm not religious or anything too, but I thank the universe for sending me a very clear sign at such a pivotal moment. In the end as well, nothing ever came of the report, but sometimes I search for that town name and crimes in case I ever recognize his mugshot, because something tells me that this was not his first or last time trying something like this. Back when I was 5 or 6 years old, in the mid-80s, we lived in Rutland County, Vermont. There was a marshy area behind our house, separated by a small wooded area. I remember almost every night for about a couple of weeks waking up to strange lights in the wooded area behind the house. My room, it was on the second floor of the house, facing the rear towards the wooded area, and I could just see the edge of the marshy area through the trees during the day. My parents' room was directly across the hall, facing the front of the house. Now, I remember going into my parents' room and telling them about the lights, but my mum would always send me back to bed without checking. I got so scared that I'd hide under my bed when the lights were happening, and it was around this same time that I started seeing small, bipedal creatures that stood about 2.5 feet tall, with large black eyes, coming out of the woods and seemingly trying to get into the house. When I told my parents about them, they would say that they were just bad dreams and not to worry about it. Almost every night, though, after seeing the lights, they'd come out of the marshy area, or wooded area, try to get into the house, and I'd hide under the bed, too scared to do anything else. Eventually, the lights stopped and they stopped coming out of the woods. My parents still think that I was just having reoccurring nightmares, but I can assure you that I was wide awake and I was not having bad dreams. So my uncle was put into an asylum last year because, well, he swore that he saw his brother, my father, in the kitchen of the house that we all share together. My uncle, myself, my mum, my little brother, and our cousin, my uncle's kid, all live in one house together because our family is kind of poor and we can only afford one house between the lot of us. My dad, he worked for the army, so he was deployed to different countries a lot. We hadn't seen him since just before Christmas, which we had to celebrate a little early that year due to my father's departure the day before Christmas. About a month had passed since my dad was deployed, before my uncle shouted his name happily from the kitchen. Me, my brother, and my cousin rushed into the kitchen to find my uncle stood there, alone and sort of confused. "Where is he?" my brother asked. "He was right here. He just... I swear he was," my uncle replied. Moments later, there was a loud knock at the door. My mother actually answered it, to find another soldier outside holding my father's uniform and tag necklace. My mother didn't cry, at least not then. Her wails echoed every hallway at nighttime, though. She just wanted to be brave in front of the kids, I guess, myself included. But my father was dead, so how could my uncle have seen him? Nobody spoke to my uncle for weeks after this. They thought that he saw the soldier coming down the pathway to our front door and made it all up as a sort of sick joke that he thought his brother might have found funny. My uncle, though, went crazy in the weeks that nobody spoke to him for. Absolutely insane. Like, he muttered to himself, he lashed out at everyone, he roamed the streets at night shouting and causing a fuss, telling random strangers what he saw was real. Nobody believed him, though. 2 police officers brought him home to us the night before we decided to put him into an asylum, for everybody's safety, him included. When we left the asylum, though, the following day, after leaving my uncle there, we arrived back home shortly after this, and I looked over at our kitchen window to find my father shaking his head at me. I instantly froze in my tracks, rubbed my eyes, but when I opened them again, he was gone. So, what the heck happened to me that day? Was my uncle telling the truth? I've never really told this story to anyone because, honestly, it still gives me the creeps many years later, and I'm afraid that people will think that I'm crazy for it. This happened back in 2018 to 2019 at my college apartment at the University of Northern Texas, UNT. This was student housing right outside of the IOOF cemetery, which is a couple of blocks long and many students will cut through to get to campus. I shared my apartment with my roommate, her name was Em, on the top floor. When you walked in, there was the kitchen and then the living room further in. We each had our own bedroom, mine to the left and hers to the right of the main space. Our personal rooms had separate locks, because we were technically paying separately like two dorms. Her room touched our neighbors, and the back wall had a sort of window facing our view of the pool and the cemetery. My room touched the outdoor hallway or breezeway, and also had a window on the back wall facing the pool and the cemetery. Both rooms also had their own bathrooms and closets too. Also, we were not able to get into each other's personal bedrooms because they had separate keys from the main apartment key. Now, one of the first instances happened on a weekend for me. M usually went home, and I sometimes stayed at the apartment to study, hang out, etc. This instance, I walked in and I noticed her light was on and heard movement all inside of her bedroom. I called out to say hey and told her that I was there, but there was no answer. I didn't think too much of it and continued doing my own thing. M later texted me asking if she had left her charger there, meaning that she wasn't there. I definitely freaked out at that and ended up getting someone from the apartments to come and check her room because at this point I suspected a break-in or something crazy. And well, in the end, no one ended up being in there, and I ended up going back home to my house early. This continued for weeks though, where I would see her lights turn on and off when she wasn't there, both during the day and the night. What was much worse, though, started happening about halfway through our year there. Now, my bed faced away from my bathroom and towards the outer window in my room, and at night, I would start hearing my toilet flush, like multiple times a night. My dad and the apartment staff both ended up checking it, but nothing appeared to be physically wrong with the toilet itself. When this would happen, I started checking the time, and I noticed that it would always happen between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. in every instance. Shortly after the flushing started, Em and I both would hear knocking too. It always sounded like it came from the outer wall, overlooking the pool and the cemetery, rather than the inner wall against the hallway. It would always be 3 knocks too, again at night time as well. Em had brought up that she was hearing it, and that honestly made me more nervous because it meant that I wasn't just dreaming it up after being freaked out by everything else. To me, though, the scariest part happened right before we moved out for the school year. Thankfully, we only had a few weeks left at this point, but around that same window of time, I would hear a baby crying. At first, I would wake up and assume that, well, maybe it was like 10 p.m. and a neighbor would have brought her baby out to the pool or something to not wake up anyone inside. However, once I got brave enough to check everything out, I realized that it was much later than that, like 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. I asked Em if she heard it too, and she told me yes, but only once or twice at this point. So, one night we ended up staying awake until 3 in the morning to see if we could hear anything, and we heard the knocking but no crying this time. However, the next day our AC went out. Not sure if that's related or not, but Em and I both heard the crying the next couple of nights after this. Em and I ended up doing some research about attachments and cleansing the apartment after this. We only had a couple of weeks left, but we honestly didn't want the next girls to have to experience this too. Em was a little more knowledgeable about all of this, and she did a sage cleanse and bought a crucifix for the door as well or whatever. And after these cleansings, the electrical issues, knocking, flushing, and crying, amazingly, they all stopped. We only had 2 weeks left at this point, so I'm hoping it truly was gone from the apartment for the next tenants. Ultimately, Em and I kind of drifted apart after graduation and COVID, but it was definitely a bonding experience when it happened. I'm hoping she's doing okay and free of any attachments like we experienced. I'm also sharing this here to see what you guys think it could have been, and also if we did anything right or wrong with the experience. I'm also curious if anyone knows anything about the cemetery and area in Texas, so please feel free to share if you do. I appreciate you guys listening, and I hope that maybe this story can potentially help someone else out there. The experience, it definitely still scares me to this day, so please be kind, even if you think that all of this is just baloney. This is one that still spooks me to this day, especially knowing my dad and just how unusual it is for him to believe anything spooky. Now, this was probably around 2006 to 2007. At the time, we were living in my hometown, a tiny rural town in a Virginia valley, surrounded by the Appalachian Mountains. My dad, he was the youth pastor at our small church, and we were living in the parsonage, which is a house owned by the church, which houses one of the pastors. It was in a rural area of the community, surrounded by farms and cornfields. It always creeped me and my 3 siblings out too. But there are so many other instances that I could share, which explains why all 4 of us now jokingly refer to that old house as haunted, even though we don't really believe in ghosts, but this one still lives in my mind. So one night, my dad was up late working on a sermon, sitting on the couch in the living room. My younger sister, about 6 at the time, walked out of the room, presumably sleepwalking, wearing a white t-shirt of my dad's. She walked into mine and my sister's room that we shared, and she just never really came back out. My dad got up to get her and bring her back to bed, and when he got to our room, he realized that somehow she wasn't in our room. He looked everywhere too, the kitchen, the laundry room, etc., trying to figure out where she went. Eventually, he went into her room she shared with our younger sibling, and there she was, still asleep in her bed, wearing purple pajamas. My dad has 2 masters in theology and is still a pastor to this day, and he has no explanation for what he witnessed that night, and it really weirded him out. The only reason I know about this story is someone at our church told me the story one time. I asked him about it, and he confirmed that it was true, and that he never wanted to tell us because he didn't want to scare us, and he knew how scared we were in that house already. It's definitely one of the weirdest things that we've encountered, and honestly, I hope to never hear something like it ever again. This happened to me recently, and I am genuinely creeped out. I'm a woman, and I was trying to get rid of my ex's stuff. Everyone told me to do Facebook Marketplace, so I did. I listed a lamp for $5, I just wanted it gone, and this guy contacted me asking for it, then told me that he was going to come and get it, but he's driving from an area about 30 minutes away. I made a mistake. I put the lamp right outside of my door because I'm a coward and I lied about an emergency that I had to leave for. But I think that my lie just saved me from something really bad. You see, I have a door camera, and I watched as 3 full-grown men walk up to the lamp, stand there for a few minutes, and then walk off. On the video, they were talking and sounded sort of upset that they came all this way for nothing. They left, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they really did just want the lamp. But still, why travel so far for a lamp, right? And why bring 2 friends? Also, I just rewatched the cameras and they looked under my doormat and took a picture of my door as well. I'm not going to ever let anyone come to my door like that again, and I feel really dumb about it. But what's done is done, and I guess the lesson is learned. I'm just wondering if there's anything that I can do about this. Should I prepare for them to come back at some point? And if so, well, what should I do? When I was around 9 years old, my father was fixing up our house with 2 rooms on the left, a hallway in the middle, and another room and a bathroom on the right. And one night, he took off all the doors, leaving just curtains in their place. While I watched TV in their room, I heard my dad from the living room asking me where I was, claiming that he saw a dark shape of a kid run from my room to theirs, right to left, and that he saw the movement on the curtains as well. He brushed it off, thinking that it was just the wind or our imagination. But later, my sister, 8 at the time, said that she saw a snake-like shadow outside of her window. I asked her for more details, and she said that it was something big, not a snake, but it moved like one. I thought that she was making it up, and then we went to bed. But after like 5 minutes of turning the lights off, my sister screamed and started crying. I could hear my parents asking her from their room what's wrong, but she wasn't answering. So my dad asked me to go and check. I guess he was scared or whatever. So I go from my room all scared and picked her up on my arms and take her to mine. The next morning, my mum asked her what happened, and she said that she was awake, looking at the ceiling, and then she realized there was a figure, like a weird shape there. When she finally was about to see what it was, she said that it was seemingly a kid with sharp teeth and horns, and the kid jumped on her. A lot of things like this kept happening to her until she was, I don't know, maybe 16 or so, where she would see things right after someone else saw a shape or whatever. And then all of a sudden, after 16 years old, everything just sort of stopped. It was a weird night, that one, and I'll never forget her screams and just how honestly scared she seemed. This was about a year ago now, and I still think about it a lot. So I was laying in bed next to my partner. We had both fell asleep around 10 or 11 that night, which was kind of out of the ordinary for us because we're normally night owls. I want to preface this too by saying that neither of us do any sort of drugs, drink, and have both not really even smoked weed since like November of 2022. In other words, it had been at least a month or two at this point that neither of us had smoked. Now, have you ever had one of those dreams like inside of a dream? Well, this was one of those. I didn't think that I was sleeping, but I certainly was. I turn over and check my phone. It's around 2 a.m. and everything seems real normal, but then the door opens and it has to have opened only enough for a person to slip in and out. I open my eyes in the dream and I see what appears to be a man that's around 8 or 9 feet tall, standing at the foot of my bed. He leans over my partner and stares at him dead in the face, but while standing there, just slowly gets closer and closer, and gets so close that it's like he was about to kiss him. The odd part is that he's still at the edge of the bed and his body is leaned over the bed. We have a queen-size bed and it's raised. Humanly, this wouldn't have been possible is what I'm getting at. I try to move, but it feels like these bricks are on my chest and I'm just completely stuck. My partner, on the other hand, I'm hearing him make uncomfortable sounds in his sleep, like something is wrong, but I can't wake him up. I began using the only bit of strength that I had left in my body to tap my boyfriend with my hand. We're laying backs flat side by side and I'm on the edge. I finally am able to pull myself out of it. I wake up as he stands straight up and moves toward my side of the bed, my eyes now open. He sees me and he looks as if he's moving from the end of the bed to the side of the bed where I'm at. Then I raise my body up and it's weird. It was kind of like I scared him if I was to put words to it. But he slowly walks to the center of the room. He's facing away from me now. And then this figure in less than 2 seconds just vanished into thin air. Our room door is always shut at night, and obviously at this point I'm not going back to sleep, so I get up to go and check the door, and it was actually cracked open. I check my phone and it's 2:32 in the morning. So how long did this go on for, I wonder? And based on the door, was it real? How did this happen, too? I'm a witch and I thought that I was protected, but the truth seems to be that no one is safe from, well, what others describe as the Hat Man. Before I begin this, just to be clear, I've never actually met this person. So this all started about 5 months ago, and it was quite a pleasant interaction, I guess, but it has slowly gotten worse and, well, just really creepy, I guess. Around November or October, I noticed that my wing mirror on my car had been put inwards. I park about a street away from my house, so I have a short walk to my house. My house is on a main road with one drive and my parents park in the drive. I asked my mother if this was her, as it was a thoughtful thing to do. She maintains that it wasn't her, and my father also said that it wasn't him. So I thought it was a kind soul or just a thoughtful person. After all, where I park, it has a lot of older people, and they always say good morning to me when I set off to work. This continues for months onwards. It's only recently stopped since parking away from that side of the street. But I asked a couple of older people on that street, and they said that it wasn't them either. At this point, I only wanted to say thank you, but I continued going to work and didn't really notice anything else until, well, the winter weather got worse. And in December of 2023 was when the weirdness continued. The frost kicked in and the snow started on occasion. Since I set off from work at about 7 AM, it can be pretty frosty at that time, and I would need to sort of de-ice my car a lot. And about mid-December, I guess, I remember running late for work. It was around 7:15 in the morning, and I still had not de-iced my car, so I was doing a careful rush to my car as it was pretty cold and icy, only to get there and see that it had been de-iced for me. I was confused, a little bit happy, but also a bit shaken, I guess. It was a strange feeling, I suppose. Again, I asked my parents and anyone that I saw on the street if they had done it, but it wasn't any of them. My mum laughed and said, you might have a secret admirer. And honestly, it was like she was a fortune teller. The de-icing of my car happened a few times more on very icy days, and from January onwards is when it got strange to the point that I started parking elsewhere. About the end of January, start of February 2024, I saw what I can only describe as homemade food left on the top of my car. And no, don't worry, I didn't eat anything. I ended up throwing these away once I got to work, but I found this situation was getting beyond strange at this point. It was around this time, too, that the first letter or note was left. It was written in what I can only describe as doctor's handwriting. It was basically asking if I enjoyed being treated like, and I quote, the princess I deserve to be treated like. I brought this home, showed my parents, and they didn't like this at all. My dad said that he was going to start parking on the street and I can park on the drive for a while. I said that that would be a good idea. However, if this person was looking for my car, he would know which house was mine. My dad agreed, but also pointed out that he or she may have already been watching me and may actually already know where I live. He stated that the main thing was that me walking home from my car to the house at 8:15 PM, I work 12-hour shifts, he said that this could be risky. He also stated that he would sort the situation out if anything happened. I questioned possibly going to the police, but my dad stated that they would just laugh at us without any proof. I knew that he was right too, so in the end we didn't really have anything. I didn't like the idea of parking back on the street, so I didn't. It's now April and I stopped parking on the drive a few weeks ago, and now I've started parking on a different street still close to my house. Nothing has happened since February, and I really hope that it doesn't, as it's starting to get worse and to escalate. So my question for all of you guys is, do I have a stalker? Or is someone just trying to mess with me? How do I catch this person in the act so I can figure out who they are? I'll try and answer whatever questions you guys have when I can, but if you guys could help me out, then that would be amazing. So this incident happened a few days ago. I work at a bar and will usually travel home between 12:30 and 1:30 in the morning. In the warm months, I'll usually use my bike or electric scooter, and on this night, I was riding the scooter. I was only a few minutes away from home at this point, but I had heard my phone go off a couple of times in my purse, so I decided to stop a moment to make sure that it wasn't anything important. I realized that this probably wasn't the greatest decision, but I don't normally get notifications like that so late at night. So I go to pull over on the sidewalk near a sloped entrance into a plaza that has a couple of bushes on either side. And on the left side there's a stone fence of sorts, or more plants I guess, but I would have been maybe 15 or 20 feet away from the left at that point. And as soon as I stopped and went to get out my phone, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. It was a tall, thin man standing up from where he had been hiding in the bushes on the left side of the entrance. He was looking right at me. He said something that I couldn't really make out and started to walk toward me. At that, I immediately got on the scooter and drive and back onto the road after that. I don't ever stop and talk to people at this time of night as a matter of principle, but anyone hiding in the bushes at 1 a.m. certainly isn't someone that I want to be dealing with. Sadly, things like this happen a lot here, though this instance was definitely one of the creepiest that I've experienced. And yeah, I definitely realized that I shouldn't have stopped, let alone when I was so close to home like that. And I guess the lesson here is, don't make the same mistake that I did. Always be vigilant when you're out at night, especially alone, because you just never know who might be hiding in the bushes, waiting to pounce at the right moment. One year ago, I was on an app, a local app, where you could talk to people who were within your area. I met a nice girl there, and we also had common interests. We hit it off right away and exchanged numbers and pictures. Everything was perfect. A little too perfect, in fact. She was all over me, saying stuff like, "You're a gentleman," and which I am, I guess, but she was obsessed with me though, and I'd never had a girl like that before. Even though she wasn't the best looking girl, she made me feel a certain type of way, I guess. And then at some point we wanted to meet, normally on a Saturday afternoon, and had a nice time. We went then at some point to hers and did the deed and that, and had a great time. I tried to sleep at this point at her home, but she didn't want me to. I thought that maybe she had lost interest because of my poor performance, but couldn't be bothered at that point and went on with my day and left the house. But no, she didn't lose interest at all. She asked me if I arrived well after I got home, maybe 30 minutes later. And after that, nothing really special happened, just normal texting about life and stuff. Until 2 weeks later, when I was done with my studies, I wanted to see her again, but something was different. The way that she wrote, without emojis and more direct. And when I wrote her, she almost instantly replied, which is kind of different because she always took her time. That's how I knew her as, and I just wanted to have my way with her and didn't care that much, but it was almost like another person is behind her mobile phone at this point. I didn't care though and said that I'll pick her up with my car at her house, but no, she said that I would meet her at a local park because she has to get fuel anyway. The location that we were supposed to meet was a local park, but she wanted to meet when it was already kind of dark, which obviously was a bit suspicious, but at that time it just all seemed a bit normal to me. But I said, why there of all places, and she told me not to ask any dumb questions, and just said be there on time. I replied LOL okay, and when I was there and was waiting for her, she came 10 minutes later, but I didn't care to be honest. I was just happy that I could see her again. She parked her car and for some reason I just got a really weird feeling. I knew that something just wasn't right, but just couldn't put my finger on it. I checked the location, was looking left and right if there was anything wrong. Also checked the bushes, but there was no one ambushing me or anything. She also didn't come out for the next 2 to 3 minutes, and I was like, yeah, that's just a bit weird. I could not see into her car because the windows were tinted, so I really couldn't see through the windows and stood maybe 20 to 30 meters away from it. I was waiting for her to come out of her car, but she never did. I was smiling, probably because of nervousness, and thought that she was playing just an unfunny joke on me, but then suddenly I get a call. I pull out my phone, and it was her. As soon as I pulled out my phone and saw her name, I heard doors open, but not one door, 2 or possibly even more. The way the car was parked was horizontal, so you couldn't really see if there were more passengers who opened the door at that point, but one thing that I knew was my body instantly went into fight or flight mode, and I knew that something was extremely wrong here. I ran for my life, and I didn't look back at who or what exited the car at this point. After I managed to escape, I deleted and blocked her number. I believe to this day that maybe she cheated on her boyfriend and he somehow found out and wanted to beat me up or do some serious harm to me or something. I've heard all the stories in news about how people lash out because of a cheating fiancé or wife, and I didn't want to be another statistic. I don't even believe that she was in the car, to be honest. Probably just 2+ dudes who intended to do some harm to me. I was kind of surprised how fast I could run, to be honest, when I actually tried to. Perhaps because of the adrenaline, I guess. But yeah, I can't say for sure that that was the scenario or if there was something more to it. Either way, I'm just really glad that I got out of there when I did. So it takes me, a 23-year-old female, about 4.5 hours to drive home when visiting my family. When I have 2 hours left, my gas tank is half full, so I always stop to get gas at the rest stop. This time I really had to use the restroom, and so I just wanted to quickly pull into the first pump that I saw available, pump gas, go to the restroom, and be on my way. When I pulled up, there was a car at the pump in front of me and a man was getting gas. Now, he was staring at me when I pulled up behind him, which I never gave a second thought to because I find it to be pretty common, to be honest. I mean, I do the same thing when a car pulls up behind me. But here's the thing. As I'm doing my thing with putting my card in, opening the gas cap, etc., I noticed that he was still staring at me through my peripheral vision. When I looked over, he would look away. When I get gas, my parents always told me to be aware of my surroundings, and so as I pump, I do a bit of a routine of looking to my left, right, in front, and behind. And this man was still watching me. So at this point, I'm just sort of staring back at him. His, who I assume to be because they looked identical, son gets out of the car, says something to him in his ear, and switches places with him. Now, this man is walking towards me, but jerks his body to the passenger side of my car and gets close to look in as he walks by. Great, I think. He's trying to rob me now. Well, good luck because my door is locked. Thanks, Mum and Dad, for that tip. He was walking around my car pretty closely while staring at me, pauses for a second, and then quickly goes inside the convenience store. I will say that it did look like he wanted to say something, but I was more focused on finishing up at the pump so I could do my thing inside and quickly leave. I had my pet with me in the passenger side in the carrier, so when I grabbed him, I noticed a pump attendant, which is never common, standing at the trash can across from me. I said, "Hey, I'm just heading inside for a sec, but I'll be right out." He smiled and told me not to worry. Now, you're probably wondering, why didn't you just go somewhere else? Well, 1, I don't fear men generally. 2, I purposely grabbed the attention of the pump attendant to show that I was traveling alone as a female. 3, I really had to use the restroom, okay? Cut me some slack if you think that I'm going to let the male species prevent me from tending to my needs. And 4, in all seriousness, as a female, I'm used to men staring at me and being a bit creepy sometimes. I know what I can handle, and this really didn't seem like it was out of place. So when I go into the store, I notice him heading to the men's room. I purposely chilled a little longer so I wouldn't run into him and leave. I made nice conversation with a lady and her kid. And post-restroom break, I grabbed a drink from the cooler, and this man came right up against me to get a drink. I quickly turned and walked away. I thought that he was gone at this point and realized that he must have been waiting for me. I dodged him a few more times inside, and he finally left. I paid and walked out after the man was already in his car, but when I walked to my car door, my heart sank. A paper was slipped in the handle, and my mind went straight to trafficking because I remembered a girl with a similar story of how she found a paper in her handle and it made her sick when she removed it. I thought, well, it finally reached this point for me. My first thought was to immediately go inside and grab an attendant. Why didn't I quickly get in the car and drive off? Because the man's car was still parked in front of mine. I didn't want him following me and possibly forcing me into something like an accident, causing me to be alone with him, since the highway was pretty empty today, until we wait for the police to show up at least. But I noticed the pump attendant who was standing on the other side was now at the trash can next to my car. He handed me some napkins and I took the paper out. And as soon as I did that, the man and his son drove off as I went to throw it away. So I went to a Catholic school growing up, solely because they had the best education in my small town. Therefore, having sisters and priests as teachers, I was never a fan of either of them, as I was not super religious growing up. It was just something that I had to do at this school. But this all changed one day after a conversation with one of the priests at the school. So my school had an exchange program with another Catholic school in California, so that every year a few kids in each grade and a priest or sister would go down and we'd get some new people at our school. For my freshman year, we had a priest who I'll call Father V. He was an older man, maybe late 60s I would guess, who taught English and religion classes. A big guy, maybe 6'3" or 6'4", and strong, stocky build. He grew up on a farm in Oregon, said that he was always a troublemaker as a kid, always got into trouble at school, drank and smoked at a young age, just doing what kids in small towns would do back then. But he was honestly one of the coolest people that I'd ever met. Super eccentric, never once seen him mad, and always had a huge smile on his face, but certainly a no sort of bull type of guy. He'd play the Stones and Skinner during class and always made time to help anyone out after class or school for papers. My friends and I always asked for his help since he was a very sharp man as well, especially with English. Spent countless hours with him after school that started out as help, then eventually just morphed into discussions and stories about life, specifically his. When he graduated high school, he actually had joined a band, which was really more of a gang in his words, and started getting into trouble with the law and whatnot. After a few years, he actually went to jail, got stabbed and nearly bled out, said that he prayed to God that if he lived, he would devote his life to him. So that's what he did, joined the priesthood the day that he got out of jail. They put him through schools all over the world, said that he met so many cool people and a lot of weird ones too, and one day after class, my friend and I had nothing to do, so we were waiting on our parents to pick us up a few hours after school. So we decided to go to Father V's room and pick his brain. Now, somewhere in the conversation, we somehow got onto the topic of God. Not hard with the priest, I know, but we had asked him for proof of God, being snarky teens just trying to pull a gotcha on him. He gave us the Bible, Jesus, proof through followers, all the typical mumbo. But we told him, yeah, whatever, but then he got serious like I'd never seen before. His eyes got sharp and there was no more smile. Straight-faced, he told us, "You know, if you believe in God, that means that you believe in the devil, right?" We laughed. He didn't. And this confused us, so we asked what he meant. So clearly and confidently that it raised the hairs all over my body, he said, "The devil is real and I've seen him." We immediately asked him what he meant and to tell us. So he said, when he was still a young priest and back in the States, he was working with an elder priest in Cali in a small town. One day they got a call from the local sheriff to come out to help with a problem at a family's house. The sheriff told them over the phone that the 5-year-old girl in the family was apparently possessed. Father V said that they got to the home and the sheriff and the parents of the girl were sitting outside praying on their knees in front of the home. He then said that they could hear a noise coming from inside the house that he could only describe as a cat snarling but in a much deeper pitch. Said that he had never heard anything like it before or since then. When they entered the home, the noise immediately stopped. Not knowing what they were in for, they began to go towards the little girl's room, and the power in the house was out. It wasn't working, even after flipping the breakers multiple times, so they had flashlights with them. When they got to her room, they couldn't get the door open. It wasn't locked, but there was something blocking the door. They only found out later that the girl had somehow ripped her wardrobe, which had been nailed into the wall, and put it in front of the door apparently. All this time he said that there was this loud cackle coming from the room, almost like a witch but a really deep male voice. They managed to knock the wardrobe over with him, the other priest, and the sheriff all shouldering and kicking at the door multiple times. Once they managed to get in, there were no windows in the room, so it was absolutely pitch black. Once they entered, though, he said that he heard scurrying across the floor and then up the wall. They shined their flashlights up the wall to see the little girl in the top corner of the ceiling upside down, completely black eyes, and the most heinous smile that he'd ever seen. Completely spooked, all three men immediately left the room and shut the door. The girl with the man's voice started howling with laughter and kept repeating, "I just want to play." The men gathered themselves, began reading scripture, and re-entered the room. This seemed to have zero effect on the girl, though, who only laughed harder and harder at the men while still upside down in the top corner of the room. This went on for several minutes, apparently, until the older priest stopped reading scripture, looked at the girl, and commanded in Jesus' name that this spirit leave. The girl fell to the floor and began screaming, almost like an animal being thrown into a fire, as he described. The man grabbed the girl and put her on the bed and held her down as the old priest read more scripture while she foamed at the mouth. This seemed to be working for a while, until the older priest attempted to splash holy water on her. Father V said that the water just instantly vaporized when it touched her skin. She let out a growl like a dog and threw the sheriff off of her like it was nothing, and scratched Father V across the stomach that drew blood. The girl then started speaking in Latin and referring to all the men through their father's name, ex-son of John. Father V said the only thing that saved them that day was that the older priest knew Latin. He began shouting back at the girl in Latin, demanding the spirit to leave the girl's body. After many hours and attempts, the girl let out in what Father V could describe as the most demonic voice that he'd ever heard. "I am Lucifer, the king of the underworld. I have ruled this earth before and will rule again." The girl then apparently just passed out, woke up a few minutes later puking up black sludge and what seemed to be locusts or insects of some sort. And then she recovered. Now, me and my friend, after hearing this tale, looked at each other and couldn't help but giggle, to be honest. Father V stared at us with a blank face, let us finish our laugh, then stood up, pulled up his shirt, revealing 4 long claw mark-like scars across his entire stomach. Now, I'll never know if this story was completely fabricated or not, I know that. But 2 things I do know, though. Father V believed his story to be true, that much was clear. And the other is that I will never forget this story as long as I live. I used to work as a cashier at a local grocery store when I was a teenager, back in the 90s. I usually worked the closing shift on Fridays and Saturdays. There was a rough-looking old man that would often come in to purchase a few beers. For whatever reason, he was obsessed with Nostradamus and claimed that he was able to predict the future and that he knew when the world was going to end. Normally I just ignored him, but one night when I heard him talking to a cashier a few lanes down, I snickered to myself and said, "What a whack job." I really don't know how it happened, but suddenly the man was standing right in front of me with this creepy intense stare. He simply said to me, "You're going to die tonight in a car crash." And then he turned and walked out of the store. I don't know what it was about how he said it, but it freaked me out. I called my mum crying, and she offered to come and pick me up and drive me home after my shift. She said that he was just a crazy guy and to pay it no mind. But after that, I never saw the guy come in again. Obviously, I didn't die in a car crash that night. But since then, I've been in 7 car accidents. None of them caused by me, mind you. But the most severe one was when I was in my 20s. I was T-boned in an intersection by a drunk driver. The car flipped a few times and landed upside down. The friend that I was with unfortunately passed away, and I had to be cut out of the car with some jaws of life. I remember coming to as the paramedics pulled me from the vehicle. I was surrounded by shattered glass and so much blood that I genuinely thought that I was dying. In fact, I almost did die. When my mum got the call, she thought that I was dead, and It's honestly a miracle that I survived with only a few minor injuries. But the words of that guy, they still definitely haunt me. And I mean, it is weirdly coincidental that after that guy said that thing that I've been in just so many accidents.